Hey guys, tonight we are heading back to the American Wild West. But this isn't a story where you're the gunslinging hero or the daring homesteader. No, this is something a little different, a little more complicated. We're going to explore what it was like to be a woman in a place where women were a scarce and precious commodity, and how beauty, far from being a blessing, could be a heavy, dangerous burden. Honestly, just surviving the first 24 hours is the main quest here. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. In the comments below, let me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where we're all tuning in from around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into 2 nights' journey together. The first thing you become aware of isn't a sight, but a sound. Or rather, the lack of one. For 6 days, the world has been a symphony of chaos, the relentless creaking of wood, the groan of leather thorough braces that serve as a poor excuse for suspension, the jangling of the harness, and the constant, rhythmic thud of 16 hooves on hard-packed earth. Now, all of it has stopped. The sudden silence is so absolute it feels loud, pressing in on your eardrums. A fine layer of alkali dust coats everything: your tongue, your eyelashes, the dark fabric of your travel dress. It's a taste and a texture you've come to know intimately. The stagecoach door is unlatched from the outside with a sharp clank. A square of blinding white-hot light frames the silhouette of the driver. He offers a hand, his palm as rough as a cob of corn. You take it, gathering your skirts with the other hand, and step down. Your legs, cramped for days, tremble as they take your full weight. You feel unsteady, a land dweller who has just spent a week at sea. And that's when you feel it. The gaze. It's not one person. It's everyone. The town of Redemption, a name that feels more like a desperate wish than a description, consists of a single, wide, dusty street, flanked by a dozen or so ramshackle wooden buildings. A general store. A saloon with swinging doors that hang slightly askew. A blacksmith forge now silent, its fires banked. And from every doorway, every shaded porch, and every dusty window, eyes are fixed on you. The men who had been lounging on the boardwalk stopped their whittling. The 2 prospectors sifting through a bag of something by the assay office freeze, their hands still. Even the bartender, wiping down a glass inside the saloon's gloom, is now a statue, his face turned toward the light toward you. This is the first lesson of the frontier, a lesson taught not in words but in a wave of silent, suffocating attention. You are a novelty. In a world where men outnumber women by staggering margins, sometimes 100 to 1 in the newest boomtowns, an unattached woman arriving alone is an event on par with a gold strike or a train robbery. Your dress, which seemed so practical and modest back in Street Louis, now feels like a ridiculous costume. A spotlight, which you once washed in a basin without a second thought, now feels like it's on public display, a painting unveiled for auction. You can almost hear them taking inventory. Your hair pinned up but with loose tendrils escaping from the long journey. The shape of your face tired and smudged with dust as it is. The fact that you are alone with no husband or father stepping out of the coach behind you. Each detail is noted, catalogued, and silently broadcast across the entire street. There's a strange and uncomfortable paradox to it all. For the first time in your life, you are utterly invisible as a person, yet hypervisible as an object. Historians working from the scant diaries and letters of frontier women still debate the precise feeling of this moment. Was it a flicker of power, knowing you held the attention of an entire town, or was it pure, undiluted terror? Perhaps it was just a deepened, wearying exhaustion, a premonition of the endless vigilance that would be required to simply exist here. The truth, you suspect, is a confusing mix of all 3. You just wanted a new start, a small piece of land, a chance. But as you stand there, blinking in the unforgiving sun, you realize you haven't just arrived in a new place. You've stepped onto a stage, and the curtain has just gone up on a play you don't know the lines to. The driver grunts as he unloads your single, small trunk, dropping it into the dust with a thud that seems to echo down the silent street. The show, it seems, has begun. Your trunk feels impossibly heavy as you drag it through the dust. aiming for the one building that looks slightly less dilapidated than the others. It has a neatly painted sign swaying in the hot breeze GABLE. SROMSFORLADIS. The Four Ladies part is what draws you in. It suggests a sanctuary, a space cordoned off from the raw, masculine energy of the street. It feels like the only viable option. The door opens into a small, immaculately clean parlor. The air inside smells sharply of lye soap, boiled linen, and something vaguely medicinal, like dried herbs. The floorboards are bare but swept clean, and the sparse furniture, a horse-hire sofa into stiff-backed chairs, is free of the ubiquitous dust that seems to rule the world outside. A woman emerges from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She is perhaps in her 50s, with her hair pulled back so tightly it stretches the skin at her temples. Her face is a roadmap of hard-won survival, etched with lines of worry and resolve. She is Mrs. Gable, and her eyes, the color of faded denim, assess you in a single, sweeping glance that is far more practical and less invasive than the one you just endured on the street. She doesn't see your face or figure, she sees your travel-worn dress, the quality of the leather on your single trunk, and the exhaustion in your posture. Room's $2 a week, she says, her voice as crisp and starched as a new shirt. Payable in advance. Dinner's at 6, breakfast's at 7. You miss it, you go without. Laundry is extra. No gentleman callers. Not ever. You have a gentleman caller. You can call on him at the church social, not here. Her rules are delivered not as a negotiation, but as a statement of unchangeable facts, like the rising and setting of the sun. You nod, your throat too dry to speak, and fumble in your reticule for the coins. Her hand takes them without ceremony. This is the reality of a respectable woman's lodging on the frontier. It wasn't just a business, it was a fortress. Historians note that these establishments, often run by widows or other unattached women of a certain age, were crucial pillars in the attempt to build a civilized society. They were the physical barrier separating the marriageable women from the fallen ones, and the rules were the foundation of that wall. Cable isn't just renting you a room, she's taking on the immense social and physical liability of your presence in this town. She leads you up a narrow, creaking staircase to a small room on the second floor. It's Spartan but, like the parlor, relentlessly clean. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a single wooden chair, and one window overlooking the main street. As she sets the key on the stand, she pauses. That's a fine wool dress, she remarks, her gaze finally settling on you. Must have been expensive back east. You murmur a thank you, but chest's not finished. Out here, wool just holds the dust. And a pretty dress, well, it attracts attention. And attention is a currency. You don't want to be spending freely. She smooths a non-existent wrinkle on the quilt. Best to keep your good things for Sunday, if you take my meaning. This is the warning. It's not a dramatic pronouncement, but a piece of practical, almost domestic advice. Yet the implication hangs in the still, hot air of the room. Your appearance, your clothes, your very being are a liability. She is teaching you the first rule of survival here: be less noticeable, less attractive, less you, less attractive. Before she leaves, she points to the water pitcher. There's a bit of vinegar in a bottle by the basin. A splash in your rinse water keeps your hair from getting dull in the dry air. This was a common, if slightly odd, little of the time. Women used vinegar for everything from cleaning windows to pickling vegetables to, apparently, personal grooming. It was a cheap, all-purpose solution in a world of scarcity, but in this context, the sharp, acidic scent of vinegar suddenly seems to fit the sour reality of your situation. You're left alone. The silence of the room is a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the street. Here, it feels like a temporary reprieve. You walk to the window and look down. From this vantage point, you can see the town laid out before you. You watch as the cowboys, who had been staring at you moments before, now get into a loud, chest-thumping argument over a card game outside the saloon. You see the sheriff leaning against a post, watching everything and everyone. The street is not just a street, it's a stage, and you're beginning to understand the dangerous dramas that play out upon it. The relationship between women on the frontier is something academics still puzzle over. Were they a sisterhood bonded by shared hardship and a hostile environment, or were they competitors, enforcing a rigid social code on one another out of a desperate need for security? Looking at Mrs. Gable, it's impossible to say. Her warning was a kind of protection, a piece of hard-earned wisdom, but it was also a command to conform, to shrink. You can't tell is she an ally or a warden. You realize with a sinking feeling, in a place like this she has to be both. You have found your sanctuary, but it feels an awful lot like a cage. The next morning you decide to venture out. Your goal is simple, almost comically so, to buy a sack of flour, some dried beans, and a bit of coffee. You need to stock the small pantry that Mrs. Gable provides for her long-term boarders. It's a mundane errand, one you've performed 100 times back home without a second thought. Here you discover it's a public spectacle. You heed Mrs. Gable's advice, choosing your plainest, most forgettable dress, a drab brown cotton that you normally used for housework. You pull your hair back severely, tucking away every stray wisp, and forgo any sort of bonnet, opting for a simple scarf to keep the sun off your head. Your goal is to be a ghost, to slide through the town unnoticed. It doesn't work. The moment you step out of the boarding house, the town's silent alarm system seems to trip. The lazy morning quiet is broken. A man mending a harness across the street suddenly finds his work less interesting than your progress. Two men who had been talking on the steps of the hotel fall silent, turning to watch you pass. Their conversation doesn't resume until you are well past them. You clutch your small cloth purse, your knuckles white. You keep your eyes fixed on the dusty ground a few feet ahead of you. But you can feel the stairs. They are like physical things pressing against your skin. You are acutely aware of the sound of your own footsteps, the swish of your cotton skirt against your boots. Each step feels deliberate, measured, as if you're walking a tightrope. You finally reach the mercantile, a long, low building that smells of sawdust, cured meats, and bulk spices. The interior is dim, a welcome relief from the glare of the sun. Shelves grown with a chaotic assortment of goods, everything from pickaxes and tin plates to bolts of calico and barrels of nails. There are 5 other customers in the store. All of them are men. When you enter, the low murmur of conversation ceases instantly. The storekeeper, a balding man with a magnificent mustache, stops weighing a bag of sugar. A grizzled prospector, who had been examining a shovel handle, slowly lowers it and turns. A young cowboy, barely old enough to shave, freezes with his hand in a barrel of pickles. The silence is absolute, broken only by the buzzing of a few lazy flies. This is the crushing reality of the gender imbalance. Historians often throw around statistics, the 1860 census in Colorado, showing men outnumbering women 30-1, or mining camps in California where the ratio was even more extreme. But statistics are sterile. The reality is this room. It's the feeling of being the sole representative of your entire gender. Every move you make, every word you speak, will be scrutinized, analyzed, and remembered. You walk to the counter, your heart thumping a nervous rhythm against your ribs. You try to keep your voice steady as you list your items. A 5-pound sack of flour, please. A pound of pinto beans. And a half-pound of coffee. The storekeeper moves with an almost theatrical slowness, as if HES trying to prolong the interaction. He scoops the beans, weighs the coffee, and he FTS the sack of flour onto the counter. All the while, you feel the weight of 5 pairs of eyes on your back. No one has resumed their shopping. They are all just watching. As you pay, the young cowboy from the pickle barrel finally summons his courage. "Mum," he says, his voice cracking slightly. You new in town?" It's an innocent enough question, but it feels like a trap. If you're friendly, are you being forward? If you're cold, are you being rude? You find yourself performing a complex social calculation over a simple question. You settle for a brief, non-committal nod. "Yes, just arrived. We don't get many, that is, it's good to have you," he stammers, his face turning a shade of red that clashes violently with his sunburned neck. A small, strange fact of frontier life was the phenomenon known as calico fever. It was a slang term for the near-delirious excitement men would feel at the mere sight of a woman after months or even years of living in an all-male environment. Some accounts describe men walking for miles just to see a woman's bonnet pass by on a wagon or to watch a family eat dinner through their cabin window. What the cowboy is experiencing is a textbook case of it. It's not necessarily malicious, but it's overwhelming. You're not a person to him, you're a cure for a fever he didn't even know he had. You gather your purchases, your hands trembling slightly. Thank you, you murmur to the storekeeper, and then you turn and walk out, leaving the 5 men frozen in there to blow. You don't look back. The walk home is the same as the walk there, a gauntlet of silent observation. By the time you reach the safety of Mrs. Gable's front door, your shoulders are knotted with tension. You lean against the closed door, the sack of flour clutched to your chest like a shield. The simple act of buying food has left you more drained than the entire 6-day stagecoach journey. You thought coming west would be about fighting the elements, about building a life from scratch. You're beginning to understand that the real struggle, the one that will define your every waking moment, is the battle to be seen as a person, not a spectacle. And that, you fear, is a battle that might be impossible to win. The question of how women navigated this constant, low-grade psychological pressure, with no outlet and no one to truly confide in, is a topic that even the most empathetic historians admit is hard to fully grasp. They can document the facts, but the feeling is locked away in the silent gazes of the past. The relentless scrutiny of the town begins to wear on you, eroding your confidence like a slow, steady drip of water on stone. It becomes a constant, humming background noise to your existence. You find yourself changing in small, almost subconscious ways. You start walking faster, your eyes always downcast. You plan your rare trips outside with the precision of a military campaign, choosing the times of day when the fewest people are likely to be on the street. One evening, sitting in your small, clean room, you have an idea. It's born not of logic, but of pure, desperate instinct. If they are going to stare at your face, you will make your face something they don't want to look at. You're going to attempt a deliberate act of unattractiveness. You take the small, cracked mirror from the washed sand and prop it against the wall. The face that looks back at you is tired, yes, but it's still your face. It's the face your mother has, the face on your father's old locket. And you are about to deface it. Your toolkit is pathetically limited. You have no theatrical greasy paint or elaborate costumes. You have only the meager contents of your trunk and the resources of your immediate environment. You start with your hair. You NP in it, letting it fall around your shoulders. Then, instead of brushing it into some semblance of order, you rub a small amount of soap into the dry strands, giving it a dull, slightly greasy look. You then scrape it back into a tight, severe bun that pulls at your scalp, hoping it gives you a pinched, harsh appearance. Next, your face. You take a tiny bit of ash from the cold, communal stove downstairs, something you scooped into a handkerchief earlier. You mix it with a drop of water, creating a thin, grey paste. You gently smudge it under your eyes, hoping to create the illusion of deep, dark circles of perpetual exhaustion. You rub more of it along your jawline, trying to mimic the grime of hard labor. The most bizarre and perhaps most debated element of this kind of disguise was the use of common household items for cosmetic or rather, anti-cosmetic purposes. While some historians dismiss these as tall tales, scattered anecdotal accounts suggest women would resort to strange methods. Stories circulate of women rubbing a bit of onion under their eyes to make them red and watery before a trip to town, or even using a touch of berry juice to create a fake, unsightly rash on their cheek. Strange little fact, the same ingenuity that allowed a homesteader to build a sword house from nothing was also being applied to the art of making oneself less appealing for the sake of safety. Now for the clothes. You take your plainest dress, the brown cotton, and you deliberately snag a thread at the hem, pulling it so it hangs loose. You find a small grease spot on the apron Mrs. Gable gave you and, instead of washing it, you leave it. You even consider scuffing your boots, but they are already so coated in dust that it seems redundant. When you're finished, you look in the mirror again. The change is subtle, but it's there. You don't look like a different person, just a worn-out, haggard, and slightly unwell version of yourself. You look like someone who has been defeated by the frontier, not someone who has just arrived to conquer it. There is a profound sadness in the act. You are mourning the loss of your own image, sacrificing a piece of your identity in the hopes of being left alone. The next day, you put your plan into action. You walk to the well behind the boarding house to draw water, a task that always draws a few lingering glances from the nearby livery stable. You keep your head down, shuffling slightly as you walk. You can still feel the eyes on you, but this time, the quality of the attention feels different. It's less a look of intense curiosity, or perhaps even distaste. One of the stable hands, a man who had tipped his hat to you with a wide grin just yesterday, now just gives you a brief, indifferent glance before turning back to his work. It worked. Or at least it sort of worked. The success is a bitter pill to swallow. You have purchased a sliver of anonymity at the cost of your dignity. It's a terrible bargain. And it's not a permanent solution. How long can you keep up this charade? Do you smudge your face with ash every morning like a bizarre ritual? Do you intentionally ruin your few possessions to maintain the illusion of destitution? Academics who study the psychology of survival often talk about strategic self-deprecation, a tactic where individuals in a vulnerable position will intentionally lower their own status to avoid being seen as a threat or a target. What you have just done is a raw, instinctual form of this. You've made yourself look weaker to avoid the dangers that come with being perceived as a desirable prize. You return to your room, the full bucket of water sloshing with every step. You wash the ash from your face, the grey streaks running into the clean water in the basin, turning it murky. As you stare at the cloudy water, you feel a deep sense of unease. This place is forcing you to fight a war against yourself. You came here seeking freedom, but you found a new kind of prison, one where the walls are built of other people's perceptions, and the only key is self-destruction. In the quiet of your room, you realize that the most dangerous thing in this town might not be the outlaws or the wild animals. It might be the very fact of your own reflection in the mirror. Your experiment in ugliness provides a temporary fragile peace. The overt staring lessens replaced by a kind of dismissive pity. But this new, lower profile brings you into the orbit of a different kind of danger, one that wears a badge and a thin veneer of civility. The town sheriff is a man named Elias Thorne. HES, not the heroic lawman of dime novels. HES, a man in his late 40s, with a portly belly that strains the buttons of his vest and a face that seems permanently full of sun and whiskey. He carries his authority not with a confident swagger, but with a kind of weary entitlement. He is the law, and in a town like Redemption, that makes him a king of a very small, dusty castle. He finds you one afternoon as you're leaving the mercantile, your small bag of groceries in hand. He tips his hat, a gesture that seems more automatic than respectful. "Afternoon, ma'am," he says, his voice a low rumble. He positions himself directly in your path, a casual maneuver that is nonetheless an exercise in power. You are forced to stop. "Sheriff," you reply, your voice tight. "I see you're set to yelling in." He continues, his eyes scanning you from head to toe. It's a different kind of look than the raw hunger of the prospectors or the fumbling awkwardness of the cowboys. It's an appraisal. HES not just looking at a woman, HES looking at a potential asset. Or a potential problem for his town. It's a rough place. A lady on her own. His words are ostensibly a warning, a piece of friendly advice from a local constabulary. But the tone is all wrong. There's a possessiveness to it, a subtle insinuation that your safety is his personal domain. "I make it my business to look after the respectable folk in this town," he says, his gaze lingering on your face. "Especially the respectable ladies." This was the complex and often perilous role of the lawmen in the West. While tasked with maintaining order, their power was immense and largely unchecked. For a lone woman, the sheriff could be her greatest ally or her most formidable predator. Historians poring over municipal records and court documents from the period find a murky reality. For every sheriff who genuinely protected the vulnerable, there was another who used his badge to extort, intimidate, and control. There was often no one to appeal to, no higher authority to report a sheriff's misconduct. He was the beginning and the end of the law. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," you say, trying to sidestep him. "But I'm fine. Mrs. Gable runs a very safe house." He chuckles a low, humorless sound. Mrs. Gable can bolt her door, But she can't bolt the whole town. There's all sorts of riffraff passing through. Drifters, gamblers, men with appetites. He lets the word hang in the air. It's good for a woman like you to know she has a friend in a position of authority. Someone to turn to if trouble comes knocking. The offer is explicit, his protection. But the implied price is just as clear, your gratitude, your deference, and perhaps more. He is marking his territory. By speaking to you so publicly, by positioning himself as your protector, he is sending a message to every other man in town: this one is mine to watch. This kind of protection was a common and insidious trap. A woman who accepted it found herself in a gilded cage. She was safe from the random harassment of the street, but she was now beholden to one powerful man. Her reputation became inextricably linked to his. If she was seen laughing with another man, she wasn't just being friendly, she was being disloyal to her protector. It was a subtle, creeping form of ownership. You realize with a sickening jolt that your attempt to seem less attractive has backfired in a way you couldn't have anticipated. The hungry stares were a threat, yes, but they were a diffuse one. Sheriff Thorne is a focused, concentrated danger. Perhaps your haggard appearance didn't ward him off, perhaps it made you seem like an easier target, more desperate, more alone, and more likely to be grateful for the attention of a man of his stature. A little-known but fascinating aspect of frontier social dynamics was the pecking order of protection. A woman's safety was often determined by the perceived strength and status of her male affiliate, be it a husband, a father, or a protector like Thorne. By unofficially claiming you, he elevates his own status while simultaneously trapping you under his thumb. "Thank you, Sheriff," you say, your voice barely a whisper. "I'll be sure to remember that." It's the only answer you can give. To refuse his kindness would be to insult him, to challenge his authority. In this town, that would be tantamount to suicide. You finally manage to move past him, your heart hammering against your ribs. You don't look back, but you can feel his eyes on you all the way to Mrs. Gable's front door. You've escaped the random danger of the pack only to wander into the specific danger of the wolf who guards the sheep. The question, which historians still debate, is which was worse, the chaos of the lawless, or the tyranny of the law itself. As you lock your behind you, you have your answer. The chaos was terrifying, but at least it was honest. This felt like a slow-acting poison. Sheriff Thorne's protection manifests as a suffocating, low-level surveillance. He tips his hat to you every time you step outside, a gesture that now feels less like a greeting and more like a reminder. He makes a point of having his morning coffee on the bench opposite Mrs. Gable's, his presence a silent declaration to the town. You feel less like a citizen under his watch and more like a prized mare in his paddock. Just as you are learning to navigate the sheriff's oppressive orbit, the new player enters the game. His name is Silas Croft, and he owns the biggest cattle ranch in the county, the Seabar. He is the town's other king, the one whose power comes not from a tin badge but from land cattle and coin. Where Thorne is fleshy and sour, Croft is lean and weathered, with eyes so pale they seem to absorb the vast, empty blue of the sky. He doesn't approach you on the street. That is not his style. His opening move is far more calculated. One afternoon, one of his ranch hands, a boy no older than 17, arrives at Mrs. Gable's door. He is holding a large, somewhat lopsided basket. Mrs. Gable answers the door, her posture immediately stiffening at the sight of the Seabar brand on the boy's belt buckle. The boy, nervous and twisting his hat in his hands, explains that Mr. Croft heard there was a new lady in town, and he sent over a few provisions as a welcome to the neighborhood gesture. Inside the basket, nestled on a bed of clean straw, is a startling collection of luxuries. There's a whole smoked ham, a wheel of cheese, a near mythical item in a place like Redemption, a jar of preserved peaches from California, and even a small, precious bag of real sugar instead of the usual molasses. To top it off, there's a bolt of fine, blue-sprigged calico fabric. In a town where a single egg can be a treat, this is the equivalent of a king's ransom. Mrs. Gable looks from the basket to you, her face an unreadable mask, but you can see a flicker of deep apprehension in her eyes. "This is too generous," she says to the boy, her voice tight. The boy just shrugs. "Mr. Croft ain't a man who does things by halves, Mom. This is the second form of frontier power play, the gift. In a society governed by unwritten rules and reciprocal obligations, a gift was never just a gift. It was a contract. To accept it was to indebt yourself to the giver. For a woman in your position, accepting a gift from a man like Silas Croft was like stepping into a finely wrought, gilded trap. The history of courtship and social obligation on the frontier is filled with these loaded gestures. A man might offer to repair a widow's fence or plough her field. On the surface, it was a neighborly act. But it was also a public declaration of interest, a way of staking a claim. Refusing the help could be seen as an insult. Accepting it created a debt that the man would, sooner or later, come to collect. You stand there frozen. The ham, the cheese, the beautiful fabric, they represent a level of comfort and security you haven't felt in months. The fabric alone could make a dress that would make you feel human again. But you understand the price. That calico isn't just cotton, it's an obligation. That hem isn't just food, it's a down payment. A fascinating, and somewhat strange, little detail from the period is the language of gifts. Specific items carried specific meanings, though this varied from place to place. A gift of practical tools might imply a desire to see a woman as a future partner in labor, while a gift of fancy goods, like this one, was often a more direct and possessive gesture. It was a way of saying, I can provide for you in a way no one else can. It was a display of wealth and power, meant to dazzle and overwhelm. We can't accept this, you say, your voice quieter than you intended. Mrs. Gable looks at you, then at the basket. She knows the danger of offending Silas Croft. He holds the town in his fist. He employs half the men, owns the land, and has the sheriff on his payroll. To refuse his generosity would be a public slap in the face. It would be an act of defiance the town would not understand or forgive. It's just a welcome basket, miss, she says, her tone carefully neutral. But you understand her silent message, we have no choice. She takes the basket from the boy and brings it inside, placing it on the parlor table like it's an unexploded bomb. The scent of smoked pork and sweet peaches fills the small, clean room, a smell so alien and luxurious it's almost offensive. That evening, you see Sheriff Thorne walk by the house. He glances at the window, and you know with absolute certainty that he knows about the gift. The news would have traveled through town faster than a prairie fire. You are no longer just the town's novelty. You are now the subject of a silent, high-stakes rivalry between the two most powerful men for 100 miles. You haven't spoken more than a few words to either of them, but you have become a pawn in their game of dominance. Your mere presence has become the prize. You look at the beautiful blue fabric, and you don't see a new dress. You see a uniform, a flag, marking you as Croft's territory, and you realize with a chilling clarity that in the Wild West, being wanted by one powerful man is dangerous. The rivalry between Sheriff Thorne and Silas Croft simmers beneath the surface of the town, a silent, tense hum that only you seem to be fully attuned to. It's not a rivalry of open conflict, but of passive-aggressive gestures and territorial markings, with you as the unwilling centerpiece. Croft might have a wagon coincidentally break down in front of the boarding house, requiring his men to linger for an hour. Sheriff Thorne might decide to conduct a lengthy and loud inspection of the saloon opposite, his presence a deliberate counterpoint. Your life shrinks even further. You feel trapped, not just in the town of redemption, but between these two grinding stones of Mayligo. Then, one sweltering afternoon, a new, more primal kind of fear rides into town. He and his two companions don't look like the usual dusty prospectors or rowdy cowboys. They ride in on lean, weary horses that look like they've been ridden hard and far. The men themselves are hard-bitten with a cold, watchful stillness about them that is far more menacing than any drunken shouting. Their holsters are worn, the leather dark with use, and their guns are tied down low against their thighs, the mark of a man who expects to use one quickly. The leader, a man with a jagged scar that pulls one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer, dismounts in front of the saloon. As he does, his eyes sweep the street, and they land on you. You are on your way back from the well, and you freeze mid-step. This is not the cuffed stare of the lonely, the proprietary gaze of the powerful, or the awkward gawk of the curious. This is the look of a wolf assessing livestock, It is cold, predatory, and utterly devoid of any recognition of you as a human being. In his eyes, you are a thing, an object to be taken. This was the ever-present, background threat of the West the outlaw. While dime novels romanticized them, the reality was grim. These were often deeply damaged, violent men who lived entirely outside the flimsy constraints of frontier law. For them, a person or a horse or a bag of gold was simply something to be acquired if they had the power to do so. Historians examining the records of stagecoach robberies and raids on isolated homesteads find a consistent pattern. Women were often treated as part of the loot, their fate determined by the whims of their captors. The man says something to his companions, and they all laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. He doesn't take his eyes off you. He just stands there watching you, letting you feel the full weight of his menace. The street, which moments before had a lazy afternoon buzz, has gone quiet. The townsmen who usually watch you are now studiously looking elsewhere. They are afraid. Their casual, daily harassment of you has been replaced by a very real fear of him. You force your legs to move to complete the short journey back to Mrs. Gable's. Each step is an agony of will. You feel his gaze on your back like a physical burn. You don't dare to run. An act of panic might trigger the predatory instinct you see so clearly in his eyes. You reach the door, your hand fumbling with the latch, your entire being screaming to get inside. Just as you pull the door open, he calls out, his voice carrying across the street with casual cruelty. "Don't you stray too far, little dove. This town's about to get interesting." The term dove, especially soiled dove, was common slang for a woman of the saloon, a prostitute. By using it, he is deliberately and publicly stripping you of your respectable status. He is branding you, marking you as someone outside the protection of polite society, someone who is fair game. It's a calculated act of psychological warfare. You slam the door behind you and lean against it, your body shaking uncontrollably. Through the front window, you see Sheriff Thorne step out of his office. He looks at the three men, and then he looks at the boarding house. There is a moment of tense silence. You see a flicker of something in the sheriff's face, not courage, but a kind of resentful calculus. He is weighing the risk of confrontation against the damage to his authority if he does nothing. The outlaw either just grins at him, a gesture of pure contempt. Then he and his men turn and push through the swinging doors of the saloon. The immediate threat is gone, but a new, more terrifying reality has set in. The fragile social ecosystem of redemption has been shattered. The silent competition between Thorne and Croft was a danger you were learning to navigate. This is different. This is different. This is chaos. The arrival of these men has turned the entire town into a powder keg, and their leader has made it clear that you are the spark. You are no longer just a new woman in town or a prize for the local kings. You are now the trouble that every man on the street, including the sheriff, will blame for whatever violence is about to unfold. The outlaw's gaze has done more than just frighten you, it has made you a public liability. Academics still debate the extent to which women were scapegoated for violence in the West, but in this moment, you feel it with chilling certainty. Whatever happens next, it will be your fault. The outlaw's public branding of you as a little dove has immediate and devastating consequences. The invisible walls of your tiny, circumscribed world begin to close in, and the first to push is the one group you had secretly naively hoped might one day offer you solace, the other respectable women of the town. There aren't many of them. There's the storekeeper's wife, a thin, perpetually worried-looking woman named Mrs. Jennings. There's the blacksmith's wife, a stout, formidable woman who seems to be in a constant state of disapproval. And there are the two elderly sisters who live near the church and seem to communicate entirely through pursed lips and significant glances. Before, their reaction to you was a cool, wary distance. They saw you as a potential disruption, a source of unwelcome attention for their husbands. Now, after decoration, their wariness hardens into outright hostility. You are no longer a disruption, you are a contamination. The next day is Sunday, and you decide to attend the small church service, hoping that the sanctity of the place might offer a brief respite. It's a mistake. As you walk toward the small, whitewashed building, you see the women clustered on the steps, their husbands hovering awkwardly nearby. As you approach, chatter stops. Mrs. Jennings, who had been mid-sentence, snaps her mouth shut. The blacksmith's wife turns her back to you with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. They form a tight, impenetrable circle, their backs to you, their bonnets like a defensive wall. You are left standing alone in the churchyard, the message as clear as if it had been shouted you are not welcome here. This is the crushing power of reputation in a small, isolated community. In the East, a person's identity was multifaceted, defined by family, profession, education, and social circles. In a frontier town like Redemption, identity was a fragile, one-dimensional thing, almost entirely dependent on public perception. And a woman's reputation was the most valuable and most brittle currency she possessed. Historians studying the social structures of the West call this enforced conformity. In an environment with few official laws, social codes became incredibly rigid. The respectable women, often living in a state of high anxiety themselves, became the fiercest enforcers of these codes. By West Racy's Inu, they weren't just being cruel, they were performing a desperate act of self-preservation. They were drawing a thick, black line between us and her. They were protecting their own fragile standing by sacrificing yours. They were demonstrating to the men of the town and to themselves that they were not like you. You can see the logic, as cold and sharp as a winter morning. Your beauty, which first attracted the general attention, then the specific attention of powerful men, has now attracted the attention of an outlaw. In their eyes, this is a predictable, inevitable progression. You are a magnet for trouble, and they are moving as far away from the magnet as they possibly can. There's a strange and little-known term from the era, reputation rustling. It was a play on cattle rustling, and it referred to the act of deliberately destroying someone's good name through gossip and innuendo. What the outlaw did to you was a form of it, and what the town's women are doing now is finishing the job. They are branding you in their own way, marking you in their own way, marking you as morally suspect, as someone who invites trouble. You turn away from the church, the sound of the opening hymn starting up behind you. A hymn about grace and fellowship that now sounds like a bitter mockery. The walk back to the boarding house feels like the longest you have ever taken. The men on the street still watch you, but their expressions have changed again. The raw desire is still there, but now in look. The outlaw's words have given them permission to see you not as a potential wife or a respectable lady, but as something illicit, something attainable. Back in your room, the silence is no longer a comfort. It's the sound of total isolation. Mrs. Gable is polite, but distant. Her livelihood depends on her boarding house being seen as a bastion of respectability. Your presence now threatens that. You are a liability to her, and you both know it. You have become an island. The men see you as a prize or a target. The women see you as a threat or a contagion. There is no one to talk to, no one to confide in, no one to stand with you. You realize that the outlaws might threaten your life, but the good people of the town are threatening your soul. They are erasing you, painting over your identity with their own fears and prejudices. The question that has puzzled so many historians, why so many women on the frontier suffered from what was then called melancholy or hysteria, suddenly seems painfully, obviously clear. It wasn't the dust or the wind or the hard work. It was this, the profound, soul-crushing loneliness of being utterly, completely alone, surrounded by people who had already decided who you were. The days following your public shunning at the church are a blur of quiet dread. You stay in your room, a voluntary prisoner, the blue calico from Silas Croft lying untouched in your trunk like a bad omen. The atmosphere in the town, you stick with unspoken tension. The outlaws remain a constant, menacing presence at the saloon, their laughter echoing down the street at all hours. Sheriff Thorne seems to be biding his time, his authority slowly eroding with each passing day he fails to act. It is during this period of isolation that a new, more insidious kind of assault begins, one that uses not overt threats, but soft words and twisted logic. It comes from an unexpected source, the young, stammering cowboy from the general store, the one who had been so flustered by your presence. His name is Billy. He leaves a small, scraggly bouquet of prairie wildflowers at your door. There's no note. The next day, he appears outside the boarding house as you fetch water, his hat in his hands. "Mum," he begins, his eyes fixed on his boots. I heard what that fellow said. what they're all saying. It ain't right. A tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignites within you. Is this an ally, a friend? Thank you, Billy, you say, your voice thick with an emotion you can't quite name. A lady like you shouldn't be alone at a time like this, he continues, gaining a bit of confidence. It's dangerous. You need someone to look out for you. Someone proper. He's not wrong. The sentiment is, on the surface, kind. But then his tone shifts, becoming more earnest, more intense. That sheriff, HES no good. And Croft, he just wants to own you like one of his cattle. But may it be good to you. It protect you. All you'd have to do is say the word. You look at him, really look at him, and the hope dies as quickly as it came. His eyes hold a desperate, feverish sincerity. He isn't offering friendship. He's offering a deal. The same deal every other man has offered, just wrapped in a different package. You're very kind, Billy, you say, trying to be gentle, but I can take care of myself. This is where the conversation turns. He takes a step closer, his voice dropping. Can you, though, look what's happening? This town, it eats up folks like you. Without a man, a woman is just lost. Everyone knows that. If you were with me, they'd all have to show you respect. That outlaw, he wouldn't dare look at you twice if you were my girl. He is not trying to coerce you with threats, but with a twisted form of logic. He is painting a picture of a world so dangerous that your only rational choice is to place yourself in his care. He is telling you that your independence is the source of all your problems. This is a classic, if rudimentary, form of what modern psychology calls gaslighting. He is attempting to manipulate you into questioning your own sanity and perception of reality. HES redefining your strength, your desire for independence as a weakness, a foolish and dangerous liability. HES not just a suitor, HES a savior, and if you reject him, you are choosing your own destruction. This psychological manipulation was a tragically common, if little documented, tool in the gender dynamics of the time. In a world that constantly reinforced the idea of female helplessness, it was easy for a man to frame his possessiveness as protection and a woman's desire for autonomy as recklessness. I can't, Billy, you say, taking a step back. His face darkens, the sincerity replaced by a flash of wounded pride. So you'd rather take your chances with them, with Thorne and Crofton that's come at the saloon. What's wrong with you, don't you? See, I'm the only one who really cares what happens to you. His voice is rising, laced with a new, bitter edge. He truly believes what he is saying. He has convinced himself that his desires are a form of noble protection, and your rejection is a sign of some deep character flaw, or even madness. He is the hero of this story, and you are refusing to play your part as the damsel in distress. I'm sorry, you say, turning to go back inside. You'll be sorry, all right. He calls after you, his voice now filled with the same resentment as all the others. When something happens to you, don't you come crying to me. You had your chance. You closed the door, your hands shaking. Billy's proposition was, in some ways, the most terrifying yet. Thorne and Croft are a political threat, but Billy is a psychological one. He tried to dismantle your reality, to convince you that your own mind couldn't be trusted. He offered you a cage and called it a shelter, and when you refused, he blamed you for the existence of the wolves outside. You sit on your bed, the silence of the room pressing in. You're beginning to understand the most cruel and complex aspect of your situation. The danger isn't just from the bad men. It's from the men who want to exile you, the women who want to exile you. And now, the good men who want to save you by destroying your will. You are surrounded, not by a circle of wagons, but by a circle of expectations, and every single one of them requires you to surrender a piece of yourself. The wild, untamed frontier you feared was supposed to be outside the town. You're learning that the wildest, most dangerous territory of all is the space between people. In your state of near total isolation, you begin to notice her. You've seen her before, of course, but only in passing, like a piece of the town's scenery. She is the young wife of Mr. Abernathy, the man who owns the mercantile and the town's small, unofficial bank. He is at least 30 years her senior, a portly, self-satisfied man who always looks like he just finished a large meal. She, by contrast, seems to fade into the background. A pale, quiet ghost in a town of loud noises. You see her sometimes through the large glass window of their house, the only two-story clapboard home in Redemption, situated at the respectable end of the street. She is always impeccably dressed in fabrics far finer than your blue calico silks and polished cottons in subdued, elegant colors. Her hair is always perfectly coiffed. She never seems to be doing anything. She just sits in a pristine parlor, sometimes with a book in her lap, sometimes just staring out the window with a look of profound, bottomless vacancy. She is the town's success story. She is the woman who made the right choice. She married the wealthiest man in town. She has security, comfort, and status. She is everything the town's women who shunned you aspire to be. She is protected. One afternoon you see her in the small, fenced-in garden behind her house. She is tending to a few struggling rose bushes, her movements slow and deliberate, on a whim, but desperate need for any kind of human connection. You walk down the alleyway behind the house. "Good afternoon," you call out softly, not wanting to startle her. She looks up, and for a moment, you see a flicker of sheer panic in her eyes, as if she's a wild creature caught in a trap. The panic quickly subsides, replaced by a placid, carefully constructed mask of politeness. "Good afternoon," she replies, her voice a soft, cultured murmur that sounds utterly out of place in the dusty air. "Your roses are beautiful," you say, gesturing to the sad-looking bushes. It's a clumsy attempt at conversation, but it's the best you can manage. "Mr. Abernathy had the soil brought in from back east," she says, not looking at you but at the roses. "He says the local soil is too harsh for anything delicate to grow." The double meaning of her words hangs in the air between you, as heavy and thick as the summer heat. You are both delicate things transplanted into harsh soil, but she's in a greenhouse and you are out in the open. This is the grim reality for many women who married well on the frontier. Their marriage was a transaction, an exchange of youth and beauty for financial security. Unlike any transaction, it came with terms and conditions. The primary condition was the complete surrender of their autonomy. Eleanor Abernathy was not a wife, she was her husband's most prized possession, an ornament to be displayed to prove his success and status. You notice something you hadn't seen from a distance. Around her wrist, she wears a delicate gold bracelet. It's beautiful, but it's also tight, and it looks heavy. It looks, you realize with a sudden chill, like a beautiful, golden manacle. Historians often find it difficult to piece together the inner lives of these women. Their letters, if they wrote any, were often censored by their husbands. But forensic accounting of old bank ledgers and household expense books sometimes reveals a strange truth. A man like Abernathy might spend a fortune on dresses, jewelry, and fine furnishings for his wife, but the same records will show she was never given a single dollar of her own. Her entire existence was funded, and therefore controlled. It was a comfortable, luxurious, and complete form of imprisonment. It must be. She finally looks at you, and in her pale, tired eyes, you see a flicker of the girl she must have been before she became Mrs. Abernathy. "The house is not quiet," she says, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is silent." The distinction is devastating. Quiet is a choice, a peaceful state. Silence is an absence, a void. She glances nervously back toward the house, as if expecting her husband to appear at the window at any moment. "You should be careful," she whispers, her words rushed. "The attention you're getting, it's dangerous. But being owned is a different kind of danger. It's slower. You don't realize you're trapped until you've forgotten what freedom feels like." She has just confirmed your deepest fears. The safety that everyone in this town seems to be striving for, the safety you yourself have been told you need, is just another word for a cage. Eleanor has that safety. She will never be harassed on the street. No outlaw will call her Adolf. No desperate cowboy will try to manipulate her. She is safe from all of it. But she will also never make a decision for herself, never have a private thought, never leave this town, never be her own person again. She has traded all the sharp, immediate dangers of the world for one slow, permanent one. A bell rings from inside the house. She flinches, her composure breaking for a second time. "I must go," she says, her voice once again flattened emotional. Says, "Mr. Abernathy will be wanting his tea." She turns and walks back to the house, her posture perfect, her steps measured. She is a beautiful, lifeless doll returning to her dollhouse. You watch her go, and you feel a strange mix of pity and terror. You have just looked into the face of the alternative. You have seen the prize at the end of the game, and it is a life of silent, gilded desperation. The choice the world is offering you is not between danger and safety. It's between a fast death and a slow one. Your brief, chilling conversation with Eleanor Abernathy leaves you profoundly shaken. The idea of safety has been poisoned in your mind. The gilded cage is no more appealing than the open prairie filled with wolves. But as you retreat further into your self-imposed confinement at Mrs. Gable's, the world outside your window refuses to be ignored, specifically, the world of the saloon. The Redemption Saloon is directly across the street, a constant source of noise and activity. It's a place you have actively avoided, a symbol of all the masculine energy that feels so threatening. But from the relative safety of your second-story window, you begin to watch it, not with fear, but with a kind of morbid curiosity. And it is from this vantage point that you first see them, the sword doves, the ladies of the evening. There are 3 of them. You see them mostly in the evenings when the oil lamps are lit and the tinny piano music starts up. They appear on the second-floor balcony that overhangs the street. Their dresses garishly colorful, their faces painted with a desperate brightness. They laugh with the men, their laughter always a little too loud, a little too sharp. They are the dark mirror to the town's respectable women. Where the town's women are drab and muted, they are vibrant. Where the wives are confined to their homes, they are brazenly public. They are the other side of the coin. The women who have fallen or been pushed outside the fortress of respectability. One of them, a redhead named Sadie by the men who call up to her, sometimes comes out onto the balcony alone in the late afternoon, before the evening rush. She'll smoke a thin cigarette and stare out at the dusty street with an expression that's not vacant, like Eleanor's, but utterly, profoundly weary. Her face, free of the evening's painted smile, is a landscape of exhaustion. Watching her, you start to piece together the grim economics of her existence. These women were the engine of the saloon's real business. The whiskey was cheap, the gambling was crooked, but the primary commodity was the illusion of female companionship, and the lives of these women were often brutal and short. This is where the story of the West becomes particularly grim, and it's a part that the romantic myths almost always leave out. Many of these women were not there by choice. The line between a woman choosing a life of prostitution and being forced into it existed at all. The term for this at the time was white slavery, and while often sensationalized in newspapers, the underlying reality was terrifyingly real. Women were ripped with promises of good jobs as seamstresses or laundresses, only to find themselves trapped, their money and belongings taken, their debts to the saloon owner mounting impossibly high. They were kidnapped from lonely homesteads or even from the back alleys of eastern cities. Historians digging through old court records and the archives of charitable societies have found heartbreaking accounts. A letter from a girl to her family, smuggled out by a sympathetic customer, begging for rescue. The testimony of a woman who finally escaped after years of abuse. Her story almost too grim to be believed. The system was designed to be inescapable. The women were often kept in a state of perpetual debt, charged exorbitant rates for their food, lodging, and even the gaudy dresses they were forced to wear. They were isolated, their connections to the outside world severed, and the law, often in the pocket of the saloon owner, offered no recourse. You see the saloon owner sometimes, a slick, oily man named Finn. He moves among the women with a proprietary air, part boss, part ukeeper. You see him grab Sadie's arm once, his fingers digging in, his face contorted in a silent, angry snarl. She dozed and flinched. She just looks through him, her expression unchanging. It's a chilling tableau, a silent confirmation of the violent control that underpins her entire existence. A strange, and often overlooked, aspect of this life was the intense and complex relationships between the women themselves. They were competitors, vying for the attention of the customers. But they were also comrades in misery, sharing a common oppressor. Accounts from the period describe them forming fierce, if temporary, alliances, protecting each other from the most violent customers, sharing meager resources, and providing a sliver of human comfort in a world that offered them none. One evening, you see a new girl on the balcony. She looks young, impossibly so, and terrified. She stands awkwardly at the railing, her painted face a tragic mask. Sadie stands next to her, not touching her, but just being there, a solid, weary presence in the flickering lamplight. She murmurs something to the new girl, who gives a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It's a small moment, easily missed, but it speaks volumes. It's a moment of mentorship in misery. A veteran teaching a recruit how to survive the battlefield, watching them from your window. A strange and uncomfortable thought takes root in your mind. You are respectable. They are fallen. The entire town is built upon this distinction. But are your situations really so different? You are being pressured to sell yourself in a respectable marriage to one man. They are forced to sell themselves to many. You are trapped in a cage of social expectations. They are trapped in a physical one. The primary difference, you realize with a cold horror, is just the price and the terms of the sale. The commodity is the same. The conversation with Eleanor showed you one prison. The saloon balcony shows you another. And you are standing in the terrifyingly narrow space in between, with hands reaching for you from both sides. The story of the girl who disappeared is told to you by Mrs. Gable. He comes out one evening, unexpectedly, as the two of you sit in the quiet parlor. The air is heavy with the scent of an impending thunderstorm, and perhaps it's the charged atmosphere, or perhaps she sees the deepening despair in your eyes. But for the first time, Mrs. Gable lets her guard down. You remind me of her, a little, she says, her voice low, her hands busy mending a torn sheet. Her name was Clara. She tells the story in a flat, unemotional tone, as if reciting a grocery list, but the starkness of her delivery only makes the tale more horrifying. Clara had arrived a year ago, much like you. She was young, pretty, and alone, carrying a small trunk and a heart full of hope. She had come west to be a school teacher. Redemption didn't have a school, but she was determined to start one. She had a light about her, Mrs. Gable says, pausing her needlework. The kind this place tries to snuff out. For the first few weeks, Clara's story was a mirror image of your own. The stares, the whispers, the suffocating attention, the gifts from powerful men, the warnings from the respectable women. But Clara, Mrs. Gable explains, was an optimist. She believed in the fundamental goodness of people. She politely refused the advances, convinced that if she was just earnest and respectable enough, they would eventually see her as a teacher, not as a prize. She didn't understand, Mrs. Gable murmurs, that this town doesn't care what you want to be. It only cares what it can use you for. The saloon owner, Finn, took a particular interest in her. Not with the overt, menacing style of the outlaws, but with a practiced, predatory charm. He told her he admired her ambition. He said the town needed a school, and he, as a community leader, wanted to help. This was a common and treacherous tactic. Men like Finn were masters of identifying a woman's hopes and dreams and then weaponizing them. For a woman dreaming of a ranch, they de-promise land. For a woman seeking family, they de-promise marriage. For Clara, who dreamed of a school, Finn promised a future for the town's children. He offered her a room above the saloon temporarily, just until a proper schoolhouse could be built. He claimed it was the only space available. He swore it was separate from the business downstairs, that it would be a quiet, respectable place for her to plan her lessons. He would even help her raise the funds. It was a perfect, diabolical trap, baited with her own noble intentions. I told her not to go, Mrs. Gable says, her voice cracking for the first time. I begged her, but she was so full of hope. She thought she could handle him. She thought her good reputation was a shield. Clara moved in. For a week, everything seemed fine. She was seen buying slates and chalk at the mercantile. Then, she simply vanished from public view. The story Finn told was that she had become discouraged and taken the eastbound stage. He even produced a forged letter to her family to prove it. But the town knew. Everyone knew. They just chose not to. Acknowledging the truth would have required a confrontation with Finn, a man who held half the town in his debt. It would have meant admitting the ugliness that simmered just beneath the surface of their lives. And so, they accepted the lie. It was easier. The disappearance of women on the frontier is a dark and largely uncontroversial corner of history. Official records are almost non-existent. A woman who moved on was rarely investigated. She was, by her nature, transient. This is a point of ongoing frustration for historians. They can track cattle brands and mining claims with meticulous detail, but the lives and deaths of countless women like Clara exist only as whispers, as cautionary tales passed down in parlors like this one. They are historical ghosts. A few weeks later, Mrs. Gable says, her voice now a whisper, I saw a new dress on one of his girls. A simple blue calico, the kind a schoolteacher would wear. The detail is small but devastating. It's the only proof she has, the only tombstone Clara will ever get. The image of that dress, stripped from a hopeful girl and put onto the back of a trapped one, is a perfect, horrifying symbol of the town's predatory nature. It consumes the hopeful and feeds their remains to the hopeless. Mrs. Gable finally looks at you, her eyes filled with a fierce, painful clarity. This place is a meat grinder, dear. It doesn't matter how you go in hopeful, proud, respectable. It is only one way of turning you out. That's why I have my rules. It's not to keep the gentleman out. It's to keep the hope from getting in. Hope is a dangerous thing here. It's what they use for bait. She finishes her story, and the only sound in the room is the distant roll of thunder and the frantic beating of your own heart. You now understand the true depth of Mrs. Gable's cynicism. It's not a personality trait, it's a scar. It's a monument to the girl she killed and saved. You also understand, with a finality that chills you to the bone, that there is no right way to navigate this world. Clara tried to be good and was consumed. Eleanor tried to be safe and was entombed. The girls in the saloon are just trying to survive the day. There are no good choices. There are only different traps. And the story of the girl who disappeared is not just a story. It's a map showing you exactly where all the paths in this town eventually lead. Mrs. Gable's story about Clara acts like a chemical agent, crystallizing all your free-floating anxieties into a single, sharp point of fear. The world, which had seemed merely hostile, now feels actively predatory. And just as you are at your most vulnerable, the predator makes his move. It's not the outlaw, nor the sheriff, nor the rancher. It's Finn, the saloon owner. He doesn't send a messenger or a gift. He comes himself, a violation of the sacred, unwritten rule that men do not call at Mrs. Gable's establishment. He arrives in the late afternoon, dressed not in his usual saloon finery, but in a sober, respectable suit. He looks like a church deacon. Mrs. Gable meets him at the door, her body forming a physical barrier. Finn, you know the rules of this house. Martha, please, he says, his voice smooth and placating, the voice of a man accustomed to getting his way through charm. This is not a social call. This is a business proposition. For the young lady, he glances past Mrs. Gable's shoulder, his eyes finding you in the parlor. A legitimate one. Reluctantly, Mrs. Gable lets him in, though she remains standing, her arms crossed, a silent, disapproving chaperone. Finn sits on the edge of the horse-hire sofa, placing his hat on his knee. He ignores Mrs. Gable and speaks directly to you. Miss, he begins, his tone using sincerity, I'll be direct. I've observed you these past few weeks. You're a woman of refinement and quality, and you are wasting away here. He leans forward, his voice dropping into a confidential, conspiratorial tone. This town has no opportunities for a lady like yourself, but I am in a position to offer one. I am expanding my business. I'm opening a small hotel, separate from the saloon, for traveling families and businessmen. I need a woman to manage it, someone respectable, to give the place an air of class. To greet the guests, manage the linens, oversee the kitchen. You would have your own small apartment, a steady income, and the protection of my establishment. It is the perfect, deadly trap, and it is baited with everything you lack: purpose, income, and safety. HE's not offering you a job on the saloon's balcony, he's offering you the manager's desk. HE's offering you a respectable cage, just one floor down from the gilded one. This was the most insidious form of recruitment used by men like Finn. The respectable job offer was a well-documented lure. Newspaper archives from the period are filled with advertisements for hotel hostesses, dance hall managers, or seamstresses for a large enterprise. Some were legitimate, many were not. They were the entry point, the plausible-sounding first step into a world from which it was nearly impossible to escape. Once a woman was under his roof, under his financial control, the lines between manager and property could be blurred and then erased entirely. A little-known but chilling detail of this practice was the contract. Often a woman would be asked to sign a lengthy employment contract, filled with complex legal jargon. This contract would include clauses about repaying the cost of her transportation, her room and board, and a penalty for breaking the contract. In essence, she was legally signing herself into indentured servitude, all under the guise of a modern, professional arrangement. "Why me?" you asked, your voice barely a whisper. You already know the answer. Finn smiles, a flash of white teeth in his handsome predatory face. Because beauty, my dear, is good for business. Even respectable business. The class of clientele I hope to attract, they will appreciate a pleasant, comely face at the front desk. You would be an asset. There it is, the truth stripped bare. You are an asset. A decoration. A piece of attractive bait to lure in bigger fish. The job is just a pretense. Your real role is to be beautiful, to be seen, to be the respectable face of his deeply unrespectable empire. You think of Clara, the school teacher. Did he make her a similar offer? Did he promise to fund her school, to give her a classroom, only to lock her in a different room entirely? Mrs. Gable's story hangs in the air between you, a silent, screaming warning. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Finn. You say, your voice gaining a strength you didn't know you possessed. But I am not interested. Finn's smile doesn't falter, but a coldness enters his eyes. The mask of the charming businessman slips for just a fraction of a second. I would reconsider if I were you, he says, his voice losing its silken edge. Opportunities like this are rare. And making friends in this town is a wise investment. Making enemies, well, that can be costly. The threat is veiled, but unmistakable. He is not just offering you a job, he is offering you a choice between being his employee or being his target. My answer is no, you repeat. He stands up, his charm evaporating completely, replaced by a chillingly calm menace. He puts on his hat and nods curtly to Mrs. Gable. Martha. He turns at the door and gives you one last look. A pity, he says. Such a waste. He leaves. The parlor feels cold, despite the summer heat. You have stared into the face of the town's most sophisticated monster and you have survived. But you have also made a powerful, ruthless enemy. Mrs. Gable walks to the window and watches him cross the street back to his saloon. You did the right thing, she says, her back to you. But now you need to be more careful than ever. Historians still debate the level of autonomy women could exercise in these situations. Was saying no a real option? Or did it just delay the inevitable? The answer likely varied wildly from case to case. But for you in this moment, the no feels like a victory, however temporary and however dangerous. You have refused the sweet, poisonous bait. You have chosen to remain in your own small, clean cage, rather than move into his larger, filthier one. But as you listen to the rising sound of the saloon piano across the street, you know the hunter, having failed with the trap, may now decide to simply come for you in the open. In the tense days following your refusal of Finn's offer, you become a reluctant expert in the subtle language of men. You're forced to for survival. You start to listen not to what they say, but to how they talk about you when they think you can't hear. It happens one evening as you're in the small kitchen at the back of the boarding house, the window open just a crack to catch the cooling breeze. Two men are leaning against the alley wall, their voices carrying clearly in the still air. One is a prospect. Do you recognize the other? Is one of Silas Croft's ranch hands. I'd give a month's wages for 10 minutes of her time, the prospector says, his voice thick with whiskey from the saloon. Croft would give you a bullet for 5, The ranch hand retorts with a dry chuckle. He's got his eye on that one. Thinks she's some kind of prize filly to be tamed. The ranch hand continues. Heard Finn offered her a job. A real one, managing his new hotel. She turned him down flat. The prospector spits. Too proud, is she thinks she's better than the likes of us. A pretty face like that, alone in a place like this. She's either gonna end up married, or she's gonna end up in the saloon. No in between. Listening to them, a wave of cold nausea washes over you. They are discussing your future, your body, your very existence, with the same casual, detached tone they might use to discuss a hand of cards or the price of beef. You are not a person in their conversation. You are a commodity, a piece of property, a puzzle to be solved. They are speculating on your market value. This is the grim reality of objectification, a concept that feels abstract until you hear it applied to yourself in the crude language of the frontier. Your beauty, your character, your choices, none of it matters. What matters is your utility to them. You are a prize filly to be tamed by Croft, a potential employee or something else for Finn, a fantasy for the prospector. Your humanity has been completely stripped away. The conversation is a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the mindset that plagued women in the West. It wasn't always born of pure malice, but of a deep-seated cultural belief that an unattached woman was an anomaly, an unfinished equation that needed to be solved by a man. Your independence wasn't seen as a virtue, it was seen as a temporary state, a problem to be rectified. A particularly strange and dehumanizing aspect of this culture was the betting. It's a detail that rarely makes it into mainstream histories, but it's documented in diaries and letters. In mining camps and frontier towns, men would literally place bets on which man would win a particular woman's hand in marriage, or how long it would take for a new arrival to be claimed. Your life was their sport. Your future was the subject of their idle wagers. The ranch hand adds another chilling layer. The sheriff's been sniffing around too. He's been warning the boys to keep their distance. Says she's under his protection. He just wants to keep the competition away. They both laugh at that. They see the whole chessboard. They understand the moves being made by Thorne, Croft and Finn. They see the silent, three-way power struggle, and they see you for what you are in that game, not a play-out. But the board itself, the ground upon which their rivalries play out. You shrink back from the window, your hands trembling. The conversation wasn't meant for you, but it's the most honest communication you've received since arriving in Redemption. It confirms everything you feared. You are not paranoid. You are not misinterpreting things. The danger is real, and it is exactly as you perceive it. The historical debate over female agency in the West often grapples with this very issue. Some scholars argue that women skillfully manipulated these rivalries to their own advantage, playing suitors against each other to achieve a more favorable outcome. Others argue that this is a romanticized view, and that for most women being the object of such a struggle was not empowering but terrifyingly dangerous, turning them into a lightning rod for male violence and ego. Based on the cold dread pooling in your stomach, you know which side of the debate you fall on. There is no power in being a prize filly. There is only the constant, terrifying knowledge that your fate is being decided by men who don't even see you as human. You let the curtain fall, shutting out their voices. But you can't shut out the knowledge. It's inside you now. You look at your hands, at the fabric of your dress, at your reflection in a darkened window pane. Are these the hands of a person, or the features of a commodity? The question is a kind of poison, seeping into your sense of self. To survive in this town, it seems you have to constantly fight to remember that you are a person. But as you stand there, listening to the distant, careless laughter of the men in the alley, you feel that part of you, the part that believes in your own intrinsic worth, starting to fade. It's being worn away, one dehumanizing conversation at a time. The walls are closing in. The protection of Sheriff Thorne feels like a leash. The generosity of Silas Croft feels like a debt. The offer from Finn feels like a threat. The casual contempt of the townsman is a constant, grinding abrasion against your soul. You feel like a cornered animal, and you start to consider the unthinkable capitulation. The idea takes root slowly, a poisonous weed in the barren soil of your despair. What if you just gave in? What if you chose a cage instead of waiting for one to be forced upon you? The question is not if, but who. Who is the least terrible option? This leads you to a grim, pragmatic, and deeply soul-crushing exercise in comparison. You begin to analyze your potential captors as if you were choosing a brand of flour. First, there is Sheriff Thorne. Marrying him would grant you the protection of the law, or at least the man who wears the badge. The other men in town would be forced to leave you alone. You would have a certain, if grudging, status as sheriff's wife. Thorne is a weak man who uses his power as a crutch. He is possessive, jealous, and you've seen the way he drinks at the saloon when he thinks no one is looking. A life with him would be a life of quiet, domestic tyranny, of being constantly watched by a man whose affection feels like ownership. He would protect you not for your sake, but for his own pride. Then there is Silas Croft, the cattle king. This is the Eleanor Abernathy option. Marrying Croft would mean wealth. It would mean the fine dresses, the comfortable house, the end of all material want. It would mean being elevated far above the dusty misery of redemption. He is more powerful than Thorne, so his protection would be more absolute. But you saw the coldness in his eyes, the same look a man gives a horse he is about to break. A life with Croft would be a life of gilded isolation. You would be his beautiful ornament, a testament to his power, with no will or purpose of your own. You would be safe, but you would cease to be you. Billy, the young cowboy, flickers through your mind for a moment, but you dismiss him just as quickly. His love was a desperate, unstable thing. Marrying him would be tying yourself to a boy's volatile ego, a life of poverty sweetened by a possessiveness that would surely curdle into resentment. And Finn. Finn is not an option. That path leads directly to the fate of Clara, a fate you dare not even contemplate. So it comes down to Thorne or Croft. The petty tyrant or the powerful owner. The stuffy small-town cage or the vast, empty, golden one. This grim calculation was a reality for countless women. Marriage, in the 19th century, was often a pragmatic, economic decision rather than a romantic one. For a woman alone on the frontier, it was the primary, and often only, path to social and financial stability. The historical record is filled with stories of women accepting proposals from men they barely knew, choosing the best available option as a pure survival strategy. What is often missing from these records, however, is the internal monologue, the cold, hard calculus you are engaged in right now. Historians debate whether this should be viewed as an act of agency or an act of surrender. Was a woman choosing her fate, or was she simply selecting the most palatable form of imprisonment from a limited menu of options? The very fact that you are using your mind to navigate this impossible situation could be seen as a form of power. But it feels like the opposite. It feels like the opposite. It feels like the final, bitter dregs of a freedom that has already been lost. A strange, little-known detail of frontier marriages was the proxy proposal. Sometimes a man, particularly a wealthy one like Croft, wouldn't even propose himself. He would send an intermediary, a lawyer, or a trusted foreman to make the offer. It was a business transaction from start to finish. The romance was stripped away entirely, leaving only the cold, hard terms of the deal. You sit in your room, the silence pressing in. You imagine a life with Thorne, the smell of stale whiskey on his breath, the suffocating smallness of his ambitions, the endless, boring dinners. Then you imagine a life with Croft, the echoing silence of a large, empty ranch house, the weight of his expectations, the crushing loneliness of being a possession. Neither path leads to happiness. They lead only to survival. And you are forced to ask yourself a terrible question: is survival enough? Is a life devoid of love, freedom, and self-worth a life worth living? The pressure to make a choice is immense. Every day you remain unattached, you are a source of instability, a target. The townsfolk, the outlaws, the powerful men, they are all waiting for you to settle the question, to pick a side, to end the uncertainty. Your single status is a vacuum, and the entire town is rushing to fill it. You look at your reflection in the small, cracked mirror. You see a woman who is tired, frightened, and utterly alone. And you realize that you are contemplating the ultimate act of self-betrayal, willingly walking into a cage simply because you are too exhausted to keep fighting. The greatest danger in the Wild West, you conclude, wasn't just being a beautiful woman. It was being a beautiful woman, period. Because every path laid out for you seemed to lead, one way or another, to the loss of yourself. Just when you feel you are at your absolute breaking point, something shifts. It's not a grand, dramatic event, but a small, quiet one. It begins with a shared glance. Her name is Sarah. She is the blacksmith's wife, the formidable woman who had so pointedly turned her back on you at the church. She is stout, strong-armed, and usually wears an expression of perpetual, weary disapproval. She is the last person in redemption you would expect to find in Alien. You are at the mercantile, enduring the usual silent scrutiny when she comes in. She needs to buy a large quantity of lye to make soap, and she FTS the heavy canister onto the counter with an ease that speaks of years of hard labor. As she turns to leave, her eyes meet yours. For a fleeting second, the hard mask of disapproval slips. In its place you see something else, something you recognize instantly: exhaustion. It's not the same as your fear-based exhaustion, but it's a kindred spirit. It's the exhaustion of a woman who runs a household, raises children, and manages a husband in a town that runs on testosterone and whiskey. It's the weariness of being the only force of civilization in her own small world. In that single, shared glance, an unspoken understanding passes between you. You are both tired. You are both fighting a war, just on different fronts. The next day you are struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water from the well when she appears at your side. She doesn't say a word. She simply takes the bucket from your hand, her grip firm and sure, and carries it to the door of the boarding house for you. She sets it down, gives you a short, sharp nod, and walks away. It is a small gesture, but it's monumental. It's the first act of unsolicited, uncomposite kindness you have received from another woman since you arrived. This is the complex, oft uncontradictory nature of female relationships on the frontier. The same women who could be the harshest enforcers of social conformity could also, in moments of crisis, form powerful, unspoken bonds of mutual support. Historians studying women's diaries from this period often find this duality. A woman might write scathingly about her neighbor's moral laxity on one page, and on the next, described sitting up all night with that same neighbor to nurse a sick child. It was a strange cocktail of judgment and empathy, born from a shared, difficult reality. The alliance with Sarah builds in these small, silent gestures. If she sees you heading to the store, she'll time her own trip to her inside, her formidable presence acting as a subtle deterrent to the loungers on the street. If she bakes a batch of bread, an extra warm loaf will appear on Mrs. Gable's back doorstep. You, in turn, find ways to reciprocate. When her young son takes a tumble in the street, you are the first one there, helping to clean his scraped knee with a cloth from your purse. You use your Eastern education to help her decipher a complicated letter from her family back in Ohio. You never speak of the townsmen of the dangers you face, or of her initial hostility. Your conversations are about practical things: the rising price of flour, the best way to get a rust stain out of linen, a shared prayer for rain. But beneath the surface of this mundane talk, you are building something vital or fragile to person society. A little-known aspect of this was the silent trade that often existed between women in these isolated communities. They would swap and share resources: a cup of sugar, a few precious eggs, a bit of thread in a complex system of barter and favor that operated completely outside the male-dominated cash economy. It was a way of creating their own small, resilient economic and social network. Your alliance with Sarah is a version of this. You are trading in support, in presence, in the simple, life-affirming currency of not being completely alone. One afternoon, she invites you to her home behind the blacksmith's forge. It's a small, cluttered, noisy space, filled with the smells of cooking and the sounds of her children. It's the complete opposite of your silent, sterile room. And for the first time in months, you feel your shoulders begin to unclench. As you sit at her rough-hewn kitchen table, helping her mend a pair of tiny trousers, she finally speaks on the unspoken subject. Abernathy's wife, she has everything, and she has nothing. The girls at the saloon, they have nothing, and they know it. It's the ones in the middle, like you, that have the hardest time. You still have something to lose. It's the most astute and passionate analysis of your situation you have ever heard. She understands. She sees the impossible tightrope you are walking. She doesn't offer a solution, there isn't one, but her acknowledgement of the problem is a balm to your wounded spirit. My John, she says, referring to her husband, he is a good man, but he is a man. He sees a nail, he hits it with a hammer. He doesn't understand the things that can't be hammered into shape. This small, fragile alliance doesn't solve your problems. Silas Croft is still a threat. Sheriff Thormenis. Finn and the outlaws are still circling, but it changes the emotional landscape of your life. You are no longer an island. You have a partner, a co-conspirator in the quiet, daily act of survival. The world is still a dangerous place, but the discovery of a single, trustworthy ally in the midst of it feels like a revolutionary act. It's a tiny flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness, a reminder that even in the harshest soil, solidarity, like Eleanor S. roses, can sometimes find a way to bloom. Your fragile alliance with Sarah, the blacksmith's wife, gives you a sliver of confidence, a resource you thought was long depleted. With it, you devise a new strategy, a piece of fiction designed to be a shield. It's a desperate gambit, a bluff in a high-stakes game where you hold no real cards. You decide to invent a fiancé. The idea comes to you one night as you lie awake, listening to the drunken shouts from the saloon. All of your problems stem from being unattached, from being the prize to be claimed. So, you will claim yourself. You will create a man so formidable, so powerful, that his mere shadow will be enough to ward off the real-life predators circling you. Crafting him is a careful, deliberate process. He cannot be just any man. He needs to be more powerful than Croft, more authoritative than Thorne, and more dangerous than the outlaws. He needs to be a legend. You begin to drop small, carefully chosen pieces of information into the town's churning rumor mill. You mention him first to the storekeeper, Mr. Jennings, while buying Fred. I'm hoping to finish this shirt before my fiancé arrives, you say. Your voice casual, your hands steady. He's a U.S. Marshal. He has been on assignment, dealing with a nasty bit of trouble down in the territories. The effect is immediate. Mr. Jennings, who was in the middle of weighing your goods, pauses, his eyes widening slightly. A U.S. Marshal. That is federal power. That is a level of authority that transcends a local sheriff's tin badge. The use of deception as a survival tool for women on the frontier is a fascinating, if poorly documented, subject. While men's lies often involved tall tales of their own prowess, women's fictions were frequently defensive. They were shields, not swords. The fictional fiancé or imminent arrival of a protective brother was a recurring trope in the scattered letters and diaries that have survived. It was a clever manipulation of the very patriarchal structure that oppressed them, using the idea of a powerful male protector to create a space of safety. You add more details over the next few days. You mention his name, Captain Cade, a name that sounds strong and resolute. You confide in Sarah, who is in on the ruse, and whose quiet support gives you the courage to continue that the captain is a decorated war hero, a man known for his quiet demeanor and his deadly speed with a firearm. You even use a small portion of your dwindling funds to mail a letter from the next town over, addressed to yourself, which you then make a point of collecting publicly from the post office. You let the postmaster see the return address U.S. Marshal's office, Fort Smith. The news ripples to redemption with incredible speed. The Kincaid legend begins to grow, each man adding his own embellishments. He's not just a marshal, he's a famous manhunter. He didn't just fight in the war, he was a spy for General Grant. The change in your treatment is palpable. Sheriff Thorne stops his daily surveillance. His protection is no longer needed if you are under the purview of a federal marshal. Silas Croft's gifts cease. To continue to pursue the intended of a man like Kincaid would be a foolish and dangerous provocation. Even Billy, the young cowboy, now looks at you with a kind of awestruck respect, as if you are already a part of the legend yourself. The most significant effect is on the outlaws at the saloon. You see them one afternoon as you walk past. Their leader, the man with the scar, watches you, but the predatory sneer is gone, replaced by a look of grudging calculation. Harassing a lone woman is sport. Tangling with a U.S. Martial is a profession with a notoriously short life expectancy. Your fictional fiancé has done what no real lawman in this town could. He has made you more trouble than you're worth. A strange and humorous detail from this period is the existence of borrowed tintypes. A woman might carry a photograph of a stern-looking man, a distant cousin, a deceased uncle, even a picture of a famous general clipped from a newspaper and present it as her fiancé. It was a simple, effective prop in her ongoing performance of being spoken for. Your bluff has worked for now. You have created a shield out of thin air, but it is a shield made of glass. It depends entirely on the fiction being maintained. It brings a new kind of anxiety. What happens when weeks, then months, pass and the formidable Captain Kidd never arrives? How long can you sustain the lie? Every question about him, every inquiry into his expected arrival date, is a test you must pass. You have won a reprieve, but you've also painted yourself into a corner. You have escaped the immediate threat by creating a future one. You have traded the danger of being claimed for the danger of being exposed as a liar. Sitting in your room, you feel a strange sense of pride mixed with terror. You, a lone woman with no power and no allies, have managed to hold an entire town at bay with nothing more than a well-told story. You have weaponized their own assumptions and prejudices against them. It's a small, lonely, and incredibly precarious victory, but in a world where you have no other weapons, the good story, you realize, might just be the most powerful one of all. The era of the captain, as you privately call it, is a strange and welcome piece. The invention of your fiancé, Captain Kincaid, has fundamentally altered your existence in redemption. The suffocating pressure has eased. The overt stares have been replaced by a kind of respectful distance. For the first time, you can walk to the mercantile without feeling like a piece of meat on display. You are no longer public property, you are the marshal's girl. This newfound peace allows you to do something you haven't been able to do since you arrived. Observe. And with the shield of your fictional protector, you begin to master the art of being invisible. You learn how to exist in the town without being the center of its attention. It's a skill set born of trauma, a series of subtle adjustments in behavior and presentation. You learn to walk with a purpose that is neither hurried nor slow, a gait that suggests you are on an errand and not open to interruption. You learn to dress in a way that is neat and respectable but utterly forgettable. Your clothes are always clean but always in muted colors, browns, grays, and dull blues. You become a creature of the background. You perfect the art of the non-committal nod, a slight dip of the head that acknowledges a greeting without inviting a conversation. You learn to make your face a pleasant, neutral mask, revealing nothing of the constant, low-level anxiety that still simmers beneath the surface. This act of consciously making oneself unremarkable is a survival tactic that historians find traces of in the margins of history. But it's hard to quantify. It's the opposite of what is usually recorded. History remembers the flamboyant, the loud, the exceptional. It rarely makes note of the woman who survived by becoming meticulously, strategically boring. It was a form of social camouflage, a way to blend into the dusty landscape and avoid the attention of predators. You develop routines. You go to the well at the same time every morning, the store at the same time twice a week. Your predictability makes you uninteresting. You are no longer a novelty, you are part of the town's furniture, a familiar shape in the daily tableau. A funny, and somewhat sad, detail of this period was the safe's own of domesticity. A woman carrying a basket of mending, a sack of flour, or a sleeping child was often treated with a different kind of respect. She was seen as performing a civilizing duty, and was therefore placed in a protected, non-threatening category. You begin to understand this instinctively. You are never seen on the street without a purpose, without a proper basket, a book, a letter to be mailed that signals you're occupied and unavailable. The greatest part of this skill is learning how to be present in a room without being in the room. When you must be in a public space like the general store, you learn to focus your attention so intently on your task that you project an aura of unapproachability. You find a spot on the shelf, a crack in the floorboards, a single item on your shopping list, and you devote your entire being to it. You create a small, invisible bubble of concentration around yourself. This newfound invisibility allows you to see the town as it really is. You see the desperation in the eyes of the prospectors, the deep loneliness in the young cowboys. You see the quiet struggles of Sarah and the other wives. You see the fragile ecosystem of the entire community, a place held together by a threadbare combination of hope, greed, and fear. But this skill comes at a cost. In learning to be forgotten by others, you sometimes feel you are forgetting yourself. The vibrant, hopeful young woman who stepped off the stagecoach feels like a distant stranger. You have suppressed her laughter, her spontaneity, her natural warmth, burying it all under layers of strategic blandness. You have achieved a measure of safety, the very thing you once thought of bartering your soul for. But it's a hollow safety. It's the safety of a ghost. You move through the town, but you leave no trace. You are seen, but you are not known. The historical debate around female survival often centers on overt acts of resistance or endurance. But what of this? What of the quiet, psychological toll of intentionally erasing one's own personality is a long-term survival strategy? This slow, grinding self-suppression is a form of violence too. One evening, you catch a reflection in the window of your room. For a moment, you don't recognize the stern, controlled face looking back at you. The expression is one you've perfected for the outside world, but now you seem to be wearing it even when you're alone. The performance is becoming the reality. You have played the part of the unremarkable woman so well that you are in danger of actually becoming her. The peace you've found is the peace of a battlefield after the fighting is over. It's quiet, but the landscape has been irrevocably scarred. The peace, as you always knew it would be, is temporary. The shield of Captain Kincaid, while effective, was always a ticking clock. The danger, when it finally comes, is not a dramatic showdown in the street, but a quiet, terrifying moment of happenstance. It's a hot, still afternoon. You are returning from Sarah's house, having helped her put up a batch of pickled beans. The main street is sleepy, almost deserted in the oppressive heat. As you pass the alleyway between the saloon and the assay office, a hand darts out and grabs your arm. It's one of the outlaws, the youngest of the three, the one who is more of a follower than a leader. His breath stinks of cheap whiskey, and his eyes are glazed with a mixture of drink and malice. He yanks you into the alley, out of sight of the main street. His grip is like iron. Well, he slurs, pushing you against the rough wood of the saloon wall. Look what we have here. The marshal's girl, all alone. Panic, cold and absolute, floods your system. Your heart hammers against your ribs so hard you feel it in your throat. This is it, the moment you have dreaded every single day. Your carefully constructed world of invisibility has just been shattered. My fiancé, you begin, your voice a choked whisper. Your fiancé INT here. Is he? The man sneers, pressing closer. Funny thing about that fella. Lots of talk, but he never seems to show up. It's almost like he ain't real. Your blood runs cold. The bluff has been called. They were just biding their time, waiting, watching. They saw through the fiction. This was the ultimate risk of the fictional protector strategy. It worked only as long as it was believed. Once doubt crept in, it could actually make the woman a more tempting target, a way for an outlaw to prove his dominance not just over her, but over the fictional, powerful man she represented. It was a way of mocking the very idea of law and order. He reaches out a grimy hand to touch your face, and in that moment, something inside you snaps. The fear is still there, a screaming, primal thing. But something else rises to meet it: rage. A white-hot, furious rage born of weeks of humiliation, suppression, and terror. The rage of being treated like an object, a prize, a commodity. The rage of the prize filly who has finally had enough. You don't scream. You don't plead. You act. You bring your knee up hard into his groin. He grunts, his eyes wide with pained surprise, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It's the only opening you need. You wrench your arm free and without thinking, you grab the one thing you can reach, the half-full bucket of pickling brine you are still carrying from Sarah's. You swing the heavy bucket with all the force of your fear and rage, catching him squarely on the side of the head. The metal bucket makes a sickening thwack and he stumbles sideways, a shower of vinegar and beans splashing against the wall. He clutches his head, a dazed, confused look on his face. This is a detail that defies the romantic myths of the West. Women didn't always faint or plead. Sometimes, they fought back with whatever they had at hand. Court records and newspaper clippings, though rare, tell stories of women using frying pans, boiling water, heavy fireplace pokers, or in your case, a bucket of pickles, to defend themselves. They used the mundane tools of their domestic lives as weapons, turning their sphere into a battleground. Historians studying these incidents call it domestic warfare, a desperate, impromptu form of self-defense. You don't wait to see what he does next. You run. You burst out of the alley and into the main street, your chest heaving, your dress stained with brine. You don't look back. You run straight for the one place you know you might be safe, the blacksmith's forge. You stumble through the wide-open doors into the smoky, clangorous heat. Sarah is there, holding a piece of hot metal with a pair of long tongs while her husband, John, hammers it into the shape of a horseshoe. They both look up, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm at your sudden, terrified appearance. It was one of the outlaws, you gasp, leaning against a workbench to support your trembling legs, in the alley. John, the blacksmith, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, doesn't hesitate. He drops his hammer, a thunderous clang on the anvil. He picks up a heavy, wicked-looking quenching rake, a long iron rod with a sharp, pointed end. He looks at his wife, a silent question in his eyes. Sarah just gives him a single, sharp nod, and then he is gone, striding out into the street with the rake held like a spear, a silent, furious citizen heading towards the saloon. You are left shaking in the heat of the forge, the smell of coal smoke and hot metal filling your lungs. You have survived. You fought back. It wasn't elegant or heroic. It was clumsy, desperate, and brutal. But it was yours. For the first time, you weren't a passive object in someone else's drama. You were the agent of your own survival, and in the fiery heart of the forge, surrounded by the tools of creation and destruction, you feel a flicker of a new, unfamiliar power, not the power of beauty or reputation, but the raw, unyielding power of a person who has decided they will not be broken. The aftermath of your escape is a strange, distorted echo of the event itself. You sit on a stool in the blacksmith's workshop, Sarah having pressed a tin cup of water into your shaking hands. The rhythmic, reassuring clang of the hammer has stopped. The forge is quiet, filled with a tense, waiting silence. Minutes later, John the blacksmith returns. His face is grim, his knuckles are scraped, but he is calm. He won't be bothering you again, he says, his voice a low rumble. He doesn't offer details, and you don't ask for them. The unspoken code of the West hangs in the air. Some things are best handled directly, and then never spoken of again. He picks up his hammer and returns to his anvil. The familiar, steady rhythm of his work a signal that, for now, the crisis is over. Word of the incident spreads through redemption like a lit fuse. But the story that circulates is not the one you experienced. In the town's retelling, you are not the agent of your own defense. You are once again a damsel in distress. The story becomes about John, the heroic blacksmith, who rescued you from the clutches of the villain. They talk about his courage, his strength, your role, the rage, the bucket. The fight is a footnote, if it's mentioned at all. You see it in the eyes of the townspeople later that day. They look at you with pity, with a kind of morbid curiosity. You are the poor woman who was attacked. Your brief, shining moment of agency has been stolen from you, polished and reshaped into a narrative that fits their worldview. Men act, women are acted upon. Even Sarah, your ally, inadvertently contributes to this. John is a good man, she tells you, her hand on your shoulder. He'll make sure they know not to lay a hand on you. Her words are meant to be a comfort, but they sting. She is proud of her husband, and in her pride, she reinforces the story that he was the hero, and you were the victim. This historical revisionism happened on a micro level all the time. The narratives of the West were, and still are, largely shaped by a masculine perspective. The stories that survived, the ones that became legends, were the stories of men's actions. The countless acts of female resilience, resistance, and quiet heroism were often erased or reframed to fit a more comfortable, patriarchal narrative. It's a point of deep contention for modern historians who must sift through layers of myth and male-centric storytelling to find the faint traces of women's real experiences. You look down at your hands, which still feel scraped and sore from the handle of the bucket. You look in the small, cracked mirror in your room at Mrs. Gable's, and you see not a victim, but a survivor. A fighter. The face that looks back at you is a stranger, but it's a stranger you are beginning to respect. She is not the pretty, hopeful girl who arrived on the stagecoach. She is not the bland, invisible ghost who hid behind a fictional fiancé. She is someone new, forged in the heat of a blacksmith's shop and the terror of a back alley. A little-known psychological phenomenon observed in trauma survivors is the struggle over the narrative of the event. Reclaiming the story, telling it from one's own perspective, is a crucial part of the healing process. In this town, you are denied that. The community has collectively written your story for you and cast you in a role you refuse to accept. This dissonance, this gap between your reality and the town's perception, creates a new kind of isolation. You are alone with your own truth. You fought back. You saved yourself. You know it, even if no one else does. And that knowledge is a small, hard, secret kernel of strength that you hold inside you. You start to understand that true freedom in this place might not be about escaping the cages of marriage or prostitution. It might not even be about being left alone. Maybe true freedom is the ability to own your own story, to look in the mirror and recognize the person you see, regardless of what the rest of the world calls you. The outlaw leader and his remaining companion leave town the next morning. Their departure is quiet, almost shamefaced. The town sees it as a victory for the blacksmith, for the decent folk. But you know the truth. They are leaving because a lone woman with a bucket of pickles and a core of unexpected fury made this town more trouble than it was worth. They weren't run out by a hero, they were run out by an inconvenience they couldn't control. You are still a target. You are still vulnerable. But something fundamental has shifted inside you. You have seen the worst the town has to offer, and you have met a mission, but with defiance. You are no longer just surviving, you are fighting. And in the quiet of your room, you make a silent vow. They can have their stories. You will keep your truth. The departure of the outlaws creates a power vacuum, and the town's fragile peace, which you had so carefully constructed, shatters completely. The era of the captain is over. Your fictional fiancé is exposed as a lie, not by any great revelation, but by the simple, brutal fact that you were attacked and had to be rescued by the blacksmith. The shield is gone, and you are left more exposed than ever. The immediate consequence is that the town's two kings, Sheriff Thorne and Silas Croft, see an opportunity. The competition for your hand, which had been held in check by your fictional engagement, now reignites with a vengeance. Their courtship, if it can be called that, is no longer a matter of subtle gestures and passive-aggressive gifts. It becomes a direct and public pressure campaign. Sheriff Thorne makes a formal call on you at Mrs. Gable's, his intentions made plain by the fact that he is wearing his ill-fitting Sunday suit on a Tuesday. He sits stiffly in the parlor, Mrs. Gable a silent, disapproving sentinel by the door. He doesn't speak of affection or love. He speaks of stability, protection, and the logic of an alliance between the law and a respectable lady. He lays out his offer of marriage like a man presenting a legal argument, a dry, passional contract that promises safety in exchange for your life. A woman alone is a magnet for trouble, as you've now seen for yourself, he says. His words a thinly veiled reference to the attack. With me, you'd be the sheriff's wife. No one would dare. It's not a proposal, it's an ultimatum. 2 days later, Silas Croft sends his foreman with a message. He requests the honor of your company for a tour of his ranch. It is not a request you can refuse. To do so would be a public insult to the most powerful man in the county. The tour is a breathtaking display of power. You ride in his fine buggy across my love land that he owns. He shows you his vast herds of cattle, his stables of fine horses, his large, imposing ranch house filled with expensive furniture shipped all the way from Chicago. Anything you desire you would have, he says, his voice a low, confident murmur as you stand on the veranda overlooking his empire. No woman in this territory would have more. The choice he presents is stark: be the wife of a small-town bureaucrat, or the queen of a vast, lonely kingdom. The pressure is immense. The entire town is watching, waiting for your decision. It's the only topic of conversation at the saloon, the general store, and over the clothal signs in the backyards. You have become the town's unwilling obsession. This intense, public pressure on a woman to marry was a defining feature of frontier life. It's a phenomenon some historians have termed marital coercion. It wasn't always violent or threatening in an overt way. It was a social, economic, and psychological pressuring of a woman toward the correct social role. Her single status was a disruption to the social order, and the community as a whole worked to correct that disruption. A strange and little-known aspect of this was the community intervention. In some small towns, if a respectable woman remained single for too long, a delegation of town elders or even a preacher might visit her to discuss her prospects and guide her toward a suitable match. It was a well-intentioned, but incredibly invasive, form of social engineering. You feel this pressure from all sides. Mrs. Gable, practical and world-weary, advises you to choose Croft. He's a hard man, she admits, but his power is real. Thorns is just a badge. Sarah, your friend, is more conflicted. Choose the one who will let you keep a piece of your own soul, she advises, though she cannot tell you which one that might be. You lie awake at night, the two choices warring in your mind. It feels like a nightmare. You have survived outlaws, manipulators, and your own despair, only to find that your reward is to be forced to choose your own cage. You realize with a sickening clarity that your act of defiance in the alley, your moment of fierce, bucket-wielding agency, has perversely made you more desirable in their eyes. In the twisted logic of this world, a woman with spirit is a challenge, a wild mare to be broken. Your resistance has not earned you freedom, it has simply raised your value as a prize. This is the ultimate, cruel paradox of your beauty and your spirit. To be plain and meek might have invited a different kind of predatory attention. To be beautiful and strong invites the attention of the tamers, the men who see you all will not as something to be respected, but as something to be conquered. The historical debate over whether the West was a land of female opportunity or oppression seems, from your vantage point, laughably academic. It was both, and they were inextricably, tragically linked. The very qualities that might allow a woman to thrive were the same qualities that made her a target. The pressure mounts. Thorn starts referring to you as my intended in public. Croft sends another gift, this time a magnificent saddle horse, a beautiful, spirited animal that mirrors your own situation perfectly. It is a gift you cannot refuse, and it stands in the livery stable as a public declaration of his claim. You are out of time. The game is over. A choice must be made, and as you stare out your window at the dusty street, at the town that has become your prison, you know that whatever you choose, a part of you will be lost forever. The stagecoach arrives on a blistering Wednesday afternoon, just as it always does, kicking up a cloud of dust that powders the town in a fresh coat of beige. It is an ordinary event, a part of the weekly rhythm of redemption. But on this day, it brings something extraordinary. It brings an opportunity. You are standing at the window of your room, caught in the throes of your impossible decision, when you see it pull to a stop. A few dusty, travel-worn men get out. A mailbag is exchanged. And then a woman and her two small children descend the steps. She is plainly dressed, her face etched with exhaustion, but she carries herself with a quiet determination. She is a homesteader's wife, here to meet her husband who has gone ahead to build their sod house on the prairie. Watching her, a new idea begins to form in your mind. It is a wild, desperate, and utterly terrifying idea. So far, all your choices have been about which man to tie yourself to. You have been focused on the cages. But the stagecoach goes both ways. It arrives, but it also departs. You have been so consumed by the drama of redemption, so trapped in the gravitational pull of Thorn and Croft, that you have forgotten that there is a world outside this dusty street. The town has become your entire universe. Its rules the only rules, its choices the only choices. But that is a lie. The real cage is not the town, it's the belief that you cannot leave it. This is the question that haunts historians studying the lives of frontier women. Why didn't more of them just leave? The answer is complex. Many were financially trapped with no money for passage. Many were socially trapped with family obligations or the belief that a respectable woman did not travel alone. And many, perhaps most, were psychologically trapped, unable to even conceive of an alternative to their circumstances. The idea of a lone woman simply striking out on her own was so far outside the social norms as to be almost unthinkable. But you have been pushed to the edge of the thinkable. The choice between thorn and croft is not a choice, it's a surrender. The idea of leaving, however, is an act of rebellion. The plan forms with a stunning, terrifying clarity. You have a small amount of money left, carefully saved. It is not much, but it might be enough for a one-way ticket. Not back east, you cannot bear the thought of returning in defeat, but further west. To a bigger town, a city perhaps, a place where you can disappear, where a single woman is not a town-wide spectacle. A place where you can be blessedly, beautifully anonymous. It is a monumental gamble. You would be arriving in a new place with nothing but the clothes on your back and a few dollars in your purse. You would be trading a known danger for an unknown one. But the unknown, for the first time, seems infinitely more hopeful than the known. A little-known but vital part of the westward expansion was the network of women's hotels and date societies that began to spring up in larger cities like Denver and San Francisco. Run by organizations like the YWCA, they provided safe, affordable lodging for single women arriving in the city, helping them find respectable work as seamstresses, governesses, or clerks. It was a fragile safety net, but it was a safety net, nonetheless. Your desperate plan is not pure fantasy, there is a sliver of historical possibility to it. You move quickly, before the cold logic of fear can extinguish the fire of your idea. You pack your small trunk, taking only your most practical possessions. The blue calico from Croft you leave folded on the bed. It is a part of a life you are refusing to live. The hardest part is saying goodbye to Sarah. You go to the forge under the pretense of a final visit. You don't tell her your planet is too dangerous. To know of it would make her an accomplice. You simply press a small carved wooden bird, one of your few keepsakes from your childhood, into her hand. Thank you, you say, your voice thick with unspoken emotion. She looks at you, her eyes full of a sad understanding. She knows you are leaving, even if she doesn't know how or when. That night, you don't sleep. You wait until the deepest point of the night, when the saloon is finally quiet and the town is asleep. You write 2 letters. One for Sheriff Thorne, one for Silas Croft. They are identical. Thank you for your generous offer, they read, but I have decided to accept another. Let them tear each other apart with jealousy. Let them believe you left with the other man. It is your final, parting shot of fiction, slipping out of Mrs. Gable's house is the easy part. You leave the letters and a week's rent on the hall table. The walk to the stagecoach office, your trunk seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds, is the longest walk of your life. The night is dark, but for the first time it feels like a comforting cloak, not a menacing shroud. You bribe the night watchman at the stagecoach office with a silver dollar. He is sleepy and indifferent. He sells you a ticket for the westbound stage, due to depart just before dawn. You wait in the dusty, silent office, a ghost about to vanish. As the first pale light of dawn breaks over the horizon, you climb into the stagecoach. You are the only passenger. As the coach lurches forward, you look out the window for one last glimpse of redemption. It is a squalid, ugly little town, and it has been your personal hell. But as you watch it recede into the distance, you feel an overwhelming, breathtaking sense of release. You are not being rescued. You are not running away. You are choosing the unknown. You are choosing the unknown. The cost of living in the land of opportunity was almost your soul, and you have just decided that the price is too high. The journey westward is a reversal of your arrival. The landscape, which had seemed so menacing on day in on your way to redemption, now feels like a vast, open promise. The relentless jolting of the coach is not a torment, it's the rhythm of your escape. With every mile you put between yourself and that town, you feel the tightly coiled knot of fear in your stomach slowly begin to unwind. You arrive in Denver several days later, covered in the familiar layer of dust, but feeling like a different person. The city is a chaotic, sprawling, vibrant mess. It's a cacophony of sounds and sights, the clang of streetcars, the shouts of vendors, the hammering of new construction, and the murmur of 1,000 different conversations in a dozen different conversations, and a dozen different number of them are women. You see them walking with purpose: shop girls, secretaries, teachers, and boarding housekeepers. They are not novelties here. They are simply part of the city's fabric. The feeling is so intoxicatingly liberating that you stand on a busy street corner for a full 10 minutes, just letting the glorious anonymity of the crowd wash over you. No one stares. No one whispers. No one whispers. No one cares. You are blessedly, wonderfully insignificant. This was the reality of the urban West, a sharp contrast to the frontier towns. Cities like Denver, San Francisco, and Portland were magnets for single women, seeking opportunities beyond domestic service or marriage. While still facing significant challenges and prejudices, they found a degree of freedom and economic independence that was unimaginable in a place like Redemption. The sheer scale of the city provided a shield that no fictional fiancé ever could. Following a lead from a woman on the stagecoach, you find your way to a YWCA boarding house, a tall brick building dedicated to providing safe lodging for working women. Tables filled with dozens of young women, all with their own stories of escape and ambition. You get a small, clean room, and for the first time in months, you lock the door and feel not trapped but secure. The change in your environment begins to change you. The hard defensive shell you built around yourself in Redemption starts to crack. You find yourself smiling at strangers. You learn to walk at a leisurely pace, to look people in the eye, to speak without constantly weighing your words. The hypervigilance that had become your second nature begins to recede. A fascinating, and often overlooked, aspect of this period was the rise of female spaces in Western cities. Beyond the YWCA, there were women's clubs, libraries, and even restaurants where women could gather without male companionship, creating a vibrant subculture of female solidarity and intellectual life. It was a world away from the isolating parlors and gossip-fueled church steps of the frontier. You find a job, not as a manager or a governess, but as a seamstress in a large department store. The work is hard and the pay is meager, but it is yours. You earn your own money, pay your own money, pay your own money, pay your own decisions. Every evening, you return to your small room, tired but satisfied. The simple act of earning your keep, of being self-sufficient, is a profound and deeply healing pleasure. It is the reality of the dream that first brought you west, a dream that was so brutally corrupted in Redemption. The railroad is the lifeblood of this new world. You watch the trains come and go from the massive depot, bringing in new people, new goods, and new ideas every day. It is the engine of civilization, the force that is slowly but surely taming the wildness of the West. You realize that Redemption was not the real West. It was a temporary, violent pocket of chaos, a byproduct of a frontier that was already beginning to vanish. The true future of the West was not in the lonely homesteads and lowest towns, but here in the bustling, interconnected, and increasingly civilized cities. Historians often mark the closing of the frontier around 1890, the point at which the U.S. Census Bureau declared there was no longer a continuous frontier line. But the taming of the West was a gradual process, driven by two key factors: the railroad and the arrival of more women and families. These forces brought schools, churches, laws, and a social order that replaced the chaotic, male-dominated culture of the early boomtowns. You have escaped the old West and found refuge in the new one. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, you think of the people you left behind. You think of Sarah and hope she is well. You think of Eleanor Abernathy, forever trapped in her silent, gilded cage. You even think of Sadie, the saloon girl, and wonder if she ever found a way out. Their stories are a part of you, a reminder of the battles you fought and the world you escaped. But their story is now your own to write, and for the first time you hold the pen. Years pass. The city of Denver grows around you, its wooden sidewalks replaced by stone, its gas lamps giving way to the steady, humming glow of electric lights. You are no longer the frightened refugee from Redemption. You are a citizen of this new modern West. You are good at your work. Your skill as a seamstress, honed by years of quiet diligence, gets you noticed. You are promoted from the noisy, crowded sewing floor to the fitting rooms, where you work directly with the wealthy clientele of the department store. You learn their names, their stories, their vanities. You become a confidant, a quiet presence in the lives of the city's elite. One day, a man's name is mentioned that sends a jolt of ice through your veins. Silas Croft. The woman you are fitting, a mining magnate's wife, is gossiping. Silas Croft is in town, she says, preening in front of the mirror. They say he's finally looking to sell his ranch. The world is changing. The big cattle empires are breaking up. Too much civilization for his kind, I suppose. You keep your hands steady, your face a professional mask, but your mind is reeling. Croft. Here, in this city. A few days later you see him. He is leaving a bank across the street from the store. He is older, grayer, his face more deeply lined, but it is unmistakably him. He looks diminished, out of place among the city's well-dressed businessmen in bustling streetcars. His power, which seemed so absolute in the small kingdom of redemption, is irrelevant here. He is just another wealthy rancher, a relic of a bygone era. You watch him from the safety of the store's large plate glass window, and you feel nothing. No fear, no anger, just a kind of distant clinical pity. He is a ghost from a past that is no longer yours. This encounter forces you to look back on your time in redemption, not with the raw emotion of a survivor, but with the cool, analytical eye of a historian examining her own past. Was it all just a terrible, random ordeal, or was there a logic to the cruelty, a system to the madness? You begin to see the entire experience as a kind of brutal, predatory ecosystem, a commercial concern where the commodity was you. Every player had a role. The lonely prospectors and cowboys were the low-level consumers, their desire creating the basic market. Sheriff Thorne was the corrupt regulator, trying to control the market for his own benefit. The town's women were the gatekeepers of respectability, trying to protect their own small market share. Billy, the cowboy, was the desperate salesman, trying to trick you into a bad deal. And at the top of the food chain were men like Croft and Finn, the monopolists, the tycoons of this grim marketplace of women. Croft wanted a long-term, exclusive acquisition of marriage, which was essentially a lifetime contract for domestic and social services in exchange for security. Finn's business model was different. He dealt in short-term leases, high-volume turnover, as seen with the girls on his balcony. He wasn't selling the cow, just the milk, over and over again. Even your own actions, you realize, were a series of market strategies. Your ugliness phase was an attempt to devalue your own stock. Your fictional fiancé was a brilliant, but ultimately failed, attempt to create a poison pill, making a corporate takeover too risky. Your escape was a hostile flight, a refusal to be acquired by any of the bidders. This cold, economic view of your own trauma is unsettling but also empowering. It demystifies the experience. It wasn't about love or hate, good or evil. It was a business, a brutal, dehumanizing, and deeply unjust business, but a business nonetheless. And you, through a combination of luck, defiance, and a well-timed stagecoach, managed to liquidate your own assets and escape the market altogether. Historians who study the marriage market of the 19th century often use this kind of economic language. They talk about a woman's value in terms of her beauty, health, domestic skills, and reputation. It's a jarringly unsentimental lens, but it often gets closer to the truth of how society, and the men who ran it, viewed these unions. The question of whether the entire westward expansion was a scam or a grand adventure is a debate that still rages. For some, it was a story of heroism and nation building. For others, it was a story of exploitation of the land, of its native peoples, and of the women who were used as currency to populate it. From your vantage point, looking at the diminished figure of Silas Croft disappearing into the anonymous city crowd, you see the truth is somewhere in the middle. It was all of it at once. A grand, terrible, beautiful, ugly, hopeful, and fraudulent enterprise. And you, for a brief, terrifying time, were caught in its gears. You look at your reflection in the glass. A well-dressed, independent woman in a thriving city, and you know who won. You did. You escaped the business and, in doing so, finally found your true worth. The years continue to spool out, each one softer and kinder than the last. You never marry. The prospect of tying your life to another after fighting so hard for your own autonomy never holds any appeal. You find companionship not in a husband, but in a rich and varied network of friends, other working women, artists, writers, the vibrant and intelligent women who populate your corner of the city. You have a life that is full, not of common survival, but of purpose and quiet joy. You are an old woman now. Your hair is the color of snow, and your hands, once calloused from buckets and then nimble with a needle, are now gnarled with age. You live in a small, comfortable apartment with a window that looks out over a city park. You spend your days reading, walking among the trees, and drinking tea with your friends. The violent, dusty world of redemption is a lifetime away, a story from another century, another world. One afternoon, your grandniece, a bright, modern young woman with a university education, comes to visit. She is a history student, and she is fascinated by the Old West. She comes to you with her books and her questions, seeing you as a living artifact, a direct link to the romantic, bygone era she studies. "Tell me about it, Aunt," she says, her eyes wide with excitement. "Tell me what it was really like. Was it terribly exciting, all the cowboys and the adventures?" You look at her bright, innocent face, and you smile. How do you begin to tell her the truth? How do you explain the smell of fear, the weight of a hostile stare, the bitter taste of objectification? Her history books are filled with stories of gunfights and gold rushes, of heroic lawmen and noble pioneers. They contain none of the stories you carry in your bones. You decide to tell her a story, not the whole raw, painful truth. That is yours alone. Instead, you tell her a polished, edited version. You tell her about the vastness of the sky, the beauty of the prairie wildflowers, the courage of women like Sarah, the blacksmith's wife. You tell her a story of hardship and resilience, a narrative that is true but incomplete. It was a hard life, you say, your voice a soft, papery rustle. But we were strong, we built a country. She listens, captivated. Your story fits neatly into the narrative she already knows. It confirms her romantic notions of the past. It doesn't challenge her or frighten her, or make her question the very foundations of the stories she has been told. This is perhaps the final, most ironic twist in your long life. You, who fought so hard to control your own narrative, now find yourself becoming a curator of the myth. To tell your grandniece the full story of redemption would be a kind of violence, a burden she is not equipped to carry. The truth is too ugly, too complicated. And so you give her the gift of a simpler, cleaner story. This is how history is made, you realize. It is a constant process of selection, of editing, of smoothing over the rough, uncomfortable edges. The stories that get passed down are the ones the next generation can bear to hear. The full, unvarnished truth often dies with the people who lived it. Academics can search for it in archives and artifacts, but the feeling, the lived reality, is ephemeral. It fades, like an old photograph left in the sun. Your grandniece eventually leaves, her notebook full of your memories, her head full of her romanticized West. You are left alone in the quiet of your apartment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. You think of the young woman who stepped off the stagecoach in Redemption all those years ago. You think of her fear, her beauty, her despair, and her surprising, ferocious will to survive. She was so very young. You feel a deep and abiding tenderness for her. You wish you could reach back through time and tell her that it will be all right, that she will make it out, that she will find a life of peace and dignity. You get up and walk to your dresser. You open a small, lacquered box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, is a small, carved wooden bird. You pick it up, its smooth, familiar shape a comfort in your palm. It is a reminder of friendship, of a moment of grace in the heart of the darkness. It is a reminder of the truth. The world may have its stories, its myths, its sanitized histories. But you have your truth. And that, you decide, is more than enough, and your small room is filled with a soft, peaceful twilight. The edges of the story are beginning to blur now, softening in the twilight of your mind. The sharp, dusty streets of Redemption are fading. the faces of the men becoming indistinct, their voices a low, meaningless hum. The fear, once a frantic, hammering drumbeat in your chest, is now just a distant echo, like thunder from a storm that has long since passed over the horizon. You can feel the gentle, rhythmic rocking of the stagecoach, not the one that took you to that terrible place, but the one that carried you away, lulling you, carrying you toward the quiet peace of sleep. You are in the city now, the vast, anonymous, and wonderfully safe city. The harsh glare of the frontier sun is gone, replaced by the soft, golden glow of gas lamps on a quiet street. You can hear the distant, comforting sounds of a world that is orderly uncalm, the clip-clop of a horse drawing a carriage, the faint strains of a piano playing in a nearby parlor, the gentle murmur of conversation from a world that no longer wishes you harm. The weight of being watched is gone. The heavy cloak of vigilance has finally slipped from your shoulders, leaving you feeling light, almost weightless. You can breathe a deep, slow breath that fills your lungs with the cool night air. You are no longer a prize, no longer a target, no longer a story being told by others. You are just you. A woman in a quiet room, at the end of a long journey. At the end of a long journey. The struggles are over. The fight is won. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Let the darkness be a soft blanket, let the silence be a gentle friend. You are safe. You are free. You are finally, peacefully, at home in the quiet landscape of your own mind. The end of the article. Good night.